Hello and welcome to the CBB Super Show, brought to you by FTN, powered by FTN. I am your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85. If you are new to the program, let me be the first to welcome you. What we do here is cover college basketball from a DFS perspective, PrizePicks perspective, and we even throw in a little bit of betting content as well. Anything we can do to help you win money. The NBA All-Star break wrapping up. That means we may lose some of these bigger contests. But if you decide to stick around, if you're an NBA guy or a pro sports guy that dipped the toe in the water of the CBB landscape, I'd encourage you to go ahead and stick around. I'm going to be doing shows 4 days a week for the next week or so. Then I'm going to be moving to 5 days. And then as it gets closer to tournament time, what I typically do is go every single day that there's a slate to make sure that you don't miss anything from the NIT, the CBT, CBI, all these secondary tournaments, and of course, the big dance, the NCAA tournament, March Madness, which is right around the corner, if you can believe that. If you're a returner and a normal frequent flyer with us, welcome back. I am very excited to see you. Pull up a chair, check out your name tag and where your desk is. We are going to cover the Wednesday CBB slate. Another, 12 games on tap here, a half hour earlier than normal lock. Make sure you guys don't forget about that. And while you're preparing and getting everything ready and your notepads and ready for the chalkboard, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure that you're subscribed to the FTN Network on YouTube. Make sure that you're subscribed to FTN Daily or FTN Bets as well. You don't want to miss out on all the written content we provide, exposure content we provide, tracker information, all the different articles, the behind the paywall shows, and then most importantly for my money, the Discord that we provide. Our community is one of the best, stands up against anyone. I'm fully confident in that. Not only is the college sports Discord very important and very valuable, but so is the pro sports, the esports, the niche sports, anything that you can possibly think of. We're providing starter information, late scratches. We're tilting live. We're talking strategy. We're brainstorming, talking to each other, spitballing, all that stuff. It's a wonderful community. And when I can't be around or Mike can't be around, Stills, any of those guys who have to step out and take care of their real life, there's still somebody in the community there posting some information, starting lineups, whatever it might be. As of now in the Discord, after the first wave of games, I typically have to step aside. After I get home from work, I have several children, as you know, but I have a very young child at home, just under 1 year old. Typically when I walk in the door, the missus, has him ready for me. So not always able to grind with you guys in the Discord after that first wave, but rest assured during conference tournaments, during the NIT tournament, during the play-in portion of the big dance, and during the big dance, not only will I be there with you the night before, the morning of, but all day long. I never work the Thursday and Friday of the tournament. It is against my religion. I refuse. Always take those days off. Always make sure I'm plopped in front of a TV, a laptop, a computer, multiple screens, streaming games, watching them on my, smart TV. And I am there with you in the mud, grinding away, trying to scrape out every single dollar possible. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, continue to check us out. I'm going to be going over the slate tonight. I'll be back tomorrow night, same time. I started a little bit later tonight. Had to finish some stuff. But I will be back tomorrow night. I will be available on Friday night for the show as well. So a couple more episodes. Next week, we're going to do the same schedule, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. No show Thursday, Saturday, or Sunday. Then the second week of March approximately, we'll be doing shows Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday every single day. Woo! Let's go. If you want to interact in the chat, feel free to do so. I am going to be able to answer your questions as we go, comments, concerns. You have some type of game that's not on the slate you want me to look at. You have a betting question. You want me to give you an answer to a this or that question. Please feel free to interact. Helps the show, helps us within the YouTube algorithm. Any interactions is a good interaction. So what we're going to do is go by each game, break it down. We're going to talk about my favorite plays from each game. If I see any sneaks, I haven't given a posh play of the day in a while. This slate, let's see if we can find ourselves a posh play of the day to unearth. Any sneaky value, any bad value, any chalk that I think, all that stuff. We're going to go through each and every slate and break it down. Let's jump in. All right. First, let's see what we got going on here. FTN had a Millie Maker winner in PGA last week. That is pretty phenomenal stuff. We have a really good team, most definitely. All right, so first game on the docket here is Providence versus UConn, a Big East battle with two very strong defensive-minded, squads here. They definitely have some DFS, viable DFS options. I typically don't like to target against Connecticut because of their strong defense and their somewhat slower pace. And I typically don't like to target against Providence when I can help it because they have a slower pace and a better than average defense as well. Both teams have pretty strong offensive efficiency rates. The Friars are 20th in the country. UConn is 12th. UConn is the number 1 rated offensive rebounding team per Ken Palm. So they're getting it done there. Plays to look at here. I'm usually off, at least lately, and lately meaning this whole season, except for November when I got burned by him a lot, was Adamus Sanogo, who's sitting there at 8.6. It's a pretty high price. UConn does have the benefit of playing this game at home. They already played Providence once before where they were held to 61 points. It was a 73-61 loss. Sanogo had 11-7. It was an okay game, 27 minutes. Jordan Hawkins had 15 real. Alex Caravan, my man, had 11-5-1. And Donovan Clingan off the bench had 12-11 and 4 blocks. He went a little bit nutty. I'm still waiting on a Donovan Clingan in 2023 ham bone game, and it's coming. On the Providence side, it was a big game for Bryce Hopkins, 27-5 before fouling out in 33 minutes. Noah Locke had 17, Devin Carter 11-4, Ed Crosswell 13-13. Jared Bynum, I think this was the game that he might have got hurt. Allen Breen came off the bench to play 30 minutes. So a pretty uneventful game, really, aside from Hopkins, Crosswell, and maybe Caravan, if you can, remember what his price was there. So I'm not really looking at paying the $9K for Sanogo. I think it's fine if you do want to go there. The price on Jordan Hawkins at 8.3, it's begun to kind of start to go after rising so high to almost 9K, which was fairly unplayable, honestly. It's starting to come back down to a more playable level. Still would like to see it come down a little bit more. Not quite there with him. Andre Jackson finally had that breakout game. He'd been under 6K for a couple of games. Busted out against Seton Hall, 15, 10-3. We knew it had it in him. He wasn't even that owned, too. I think people had kind of given up on him. But it was only like 4 games ago when he put up 30 against Georgetown. So I don't know why people fully gave up on him. He's sitting there at 6K now. After putting up 40, I think he's fine. A little bit less interested at that price point, especially in this matchup. If you really want to get cute, you have some of these Naheem Aline, Joey Calcaterra, Hassan Diarra plays. Really, none of them are in play, even though at their previous stops they were somewhat viable. Instead, GPP-wise, we're looking at Donovan Clingan. He's always in play because of his high fantasy point per minute. He hasn't really busted out. I guess he had a 50 against Marquette, so I guess he has had a ham game in 2023. But he had a couple of really monster 40, 33s and big games in December. Hasn't been able to really fully flourish here in January and February. That has to do with the fact that Sanogo's been on the court a lot longer. He's really at the mercy of foul trouble for the starters. And Clingan also has a very high foul rate, so that has an issue for him as well. Seems to be stuck in neutral with about 15 minutes per game. But you see, fantasy points-wise, 22, 9, 17, 13, and 14. So if we can get him to 20, 25 minutes somehow, he will break the slate, absolutely. I always like Alex Caravan. I am really confident that he's going to be a maybe not like a mega star or anything, but a collegiate star, maybe a first or second team all Big East caliber type of player. He's already playing over 30 minutes per game, taking plenty of shots, contributes in all categories. He's fine here if you want to look at him at 6.2. It's cheapest price he's been in quite some time, so I'm definitely on board there for like a GPP. But otherwise, I'm not on these UConn guys. The Providence side is I think almost even less interesting to me, just because, like I said, the UConn, they're playing well again right now. Their defense is really strong. Aside from Hopkins and Crosswell, they really haven't, nobody in that game really did that well for the Friars. Noah Locke's above 5K, so sticker price there is not as great. Allen Breed's no good with Bynum back. Ed Crosswell at 7.5 is a intriguing price, but he's sometimes hit or miss, and on the road I would be a little bit worried about using him. And Bryce Hopkins almost 10K for a game where he's probably going to be looking at about mid 3, 35 fantasy points, something like that. We can probably spend our money a little bit better. So we will go ahead and move on to this next game and try to flow a little bit better this evening. Kentucky versus Florida. We have ourselves a Kentucky team that is trying to fight their way back. And there's talk of, oh, man, Kentucky and North Carolina not making the tournament. Oh, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Like, celebrate. Kentucky's 18-9, though. They did just come off a very strong, convincing home win over a suddenly mediocre Tennessee team. I know that Tennessee lost again tonight against Texas A&M. Granted, they've had guys who are injured, but my goodness, I have to thank Rick Barnes. I really, really do, because every year in the tournament, I find myself getting hyped about Tennessee. And putting too much money on them, picking into the Final Four, and it wrecks me every time. I don't have to do that because they're falling apart nice and early this year. Another tough loss for them. So I don't know what to read into with Kentucky here, if it's a good win for them against Tennessee or if Tennessee's just a bad team now. Obviously shorthanded with the injuries, but even at full strength, they don't really scare me that much. Kentucky's another team that doesn't really scare me that much. Each and every slate, it's always a question of, do we want to roster Oscar Tshiebwe? I have noticed his rostership dip down quite a bit this season as opposed to last season. People, I think, are starting to discover on this particular iteration of Kentucky, while the alpha, there's a lot of guards around him taking shots. Severe Wheeler's constantly injured, which doesn't help at all because Oscar's not getting good entry passes from the guards who are taking over for Severe. And a lot of times on these bad shots, they're clanging way far out. Oscar's not in position to get the rebound. So we're seeing him not pay off that high price as much, and that's caused people to kind of pull away a little bit. Whereas before, we could just fade a chalk Oscar and kind of clean up because, he's sitting around 30 to 35 fantasy points at 9, 5, 10K. It's just okay. It's not breaking the slate. He did break the slate against Georgia at 53 fantasy points, but that wasn't enough to sway the industry back towards using him heavily. He's just not performing at the level maybe we're accustomed to. So I'm not really looking to use him either on the road against Florida, even though there is no Colin Castleton. I think that instead I want to continue to throw Antonio Reeves out there sitting at 5'6". Even if Severe Wheeler and CJ Frederick were to return, Reeves is really one of the few sources of consistent offense at this point that can, generate any kind of scoring. I think he has to continue to play minutes. It does sound like Wheeler's ankle is not getting better at all. It sounds like we won't see him play in this game, so we don't really have to worry about that. And it sounds like CJ Frederick is dealing with a mid-body injury is what they're calling it. Very vague. Sounds like he's got a chance to miss out on this game as well. So that's going to keep Antonio Reeves into a big minute role. Look for him to play 30-plus minutes. I know that he's been under 20 fantasy points in back-to-back games. You have to look at it, though. Mississippi State, a tough defense on the road. Tennessee, even though they beat Tennessee, that's still a tough defense to deal with. Reeves, didn't shoot horribly, but the volume is still there. Look for him to bounce back in this spot and I think, put up a healthy 4X number. So definitely on board with using him. Cason Wallace is under 8K sitting at 7.7. He definitely looked fantastic against the Vols, scoring 16 points, 6 rebounds, 6 assists on his way to 33. He had 29 against Mississippi State the game before that. So back-to-back 29-plus performances against tougher defenses. Going up against Florida, looks like he's healthy. Getting back into a rhythm here a little bit and ready to do some damage. So I'm on board with using him as well. Maybe not in my main lineup. I might be going back to the CSV. I see the mini max is back in the lobby for tomorrow. So looks like we're going to be able to grind the mini max each day if we want. He's definitely a type of player I would like to get 15 to 20% type of exposure on this particular slate. just like I said, not sure I'm there with him on my main just at the moment. Chris Livingston's price has shot way up after back-to-back 30s as well, both against tough opponents. It looks like the talented freshman who high pedigree, highly ranked, kind of started off the season fairly, I don't want to say mediocre or anything, but not much of a factor in terms of DFS. Now, out of necessity, he's had to play a lot of minutes. He's been able to get repetition, and a player with his caliber of talent is starting to play extremely well. So his price up at 5.9 makes it a little less exciting for me, but the way he's playing, you have to absolutely consider him. And if you're going for the home run play, Jacob Toppin is always worth the shot. I know he hasn't looked particularly great lately. It's amazing that they beat Tennessee with Toppin and Oscar, and Antonio Reeves playing kind of mediocre. Just speaks to how well Livingston and Cason Wallace played. But Toppin is capable scorer, rebounder, a really nice, second piece to Oscar Tshiebwe, able to score 30-plus fantasy points. The price is a little high at $8K, absolutely, but he's a great GPP play because nobody's going to be on him at that price. He does have 40 fantasy point upside. Florida Gators, even on the road, are we really scared of Florida? No, we are not. This reminds me also, we need to start preparing ourselves for senior nights. If you're not sure about what senior night is, that is when, and we've got COVID seniors and some guys who have been 2-year seniors, but you get that extra year. So sometimes seniors aren't truly seniors. So we're off to make sure that we're really aware of what's going on. However, you might start seeing over the next couple of weeks some random seniors that maybe don't play as much in the starting lineup. Don't let it alarm you. This is pretty customary every single season. Seniors who are going to be out of the program after the season will get a token start. And if they're, a regular starter, then it's just, kind of the narrative like, well, this is their last home game. They're going to go off, whatever. And a lot of times you'll see guys who are, top flight freshmen, sophomore, juniors. They're not starting because they're giving the lesser known senior a start. Don't be alarmed by that. Let the other people in the industry freak out, but then you'll know the guy coming off the bench is still going to get his normal 30 to 35 minutes. We will be very clear in the Discord about that when it happens, so just be ready. It happens every single year. Not that it's happening here. In the Florida game, we have at least another week beforehand. I think Florida's senior night, I might be wrong about this, but I think it's the Saturday game against LSU next Saturday. So I think we're fine there and free and clear, but we'll see. The rest of Kentucky, they should. Adu Tiero has a lot of talent. I don't know why he doesn't get an opportunity to play with all of these injuries at this point. I think Coach Cal, who's still young in terms of coaches, the game is kind of passed him by in a little bit because he's still coaching like it's the 90s. You get that feedback a lot from a lot smarter people than me in the game. They need to play Tiero a lot more. And you might look at it and be like, but he gave him 14 minutes last game. They gave him 16 minutes the game before that. He needs a little bit more time to get acclimated. He's still super raw. Been playing 3 minutes, 7 minutes, 6 minutes, just all over the place. He's got talent. Trust me, he needs to play more. It's kind of interesting at 3K if he were to get around 20 minutes. I don't know that he will, but with all these injuries and a lack of a bench for Kentucky, if one of the starters were to get into foul trouble, that might thrust Tiero into a bigger role. And you never know, knock on wood, injuries happen all the time. So Kentucky-wise, fade Oscar Tshiebwe. Jacob Toppin is a GPP special. I like Cason Wallace. I like Chris Livingston. Antonio Reeves is a borderline main team play. On the Gators side, I had an entire spiel for you during the game after Castleton was injured about one player in particular that we knew was going to be chalk. Sitting here talking about Jason Jitaba. He's like 300 pounds, not very athletic. I thought that the Arkansas front court was going to give him trouble. I thought he would get into foul trouble and just not play that well. That was something that I talked about at length. Now, I was wrong about his minutes because he did play 24, and he only had 2 fouls, but the athleticism of the Arkansas Razorbacks was a problem for him. Gators got their doors blown off. He was completely out of position on nearly every rebounding opportunity. Wasn't getting anything going inside, had a couple of turnovers, 5.5 fantasy points. So we got to the destination that we talked about with the fade. It might have been for a slightly different reason because it wasn't foul related, but it did have to do with the fact that he wasn't able to deal with the athleticism. Going up against Oscar Tshiebwe, he can play a little bit more to his style, but still, he's 3.6 now. Do we really want to go back to the Jitterbug train? For those of you that were on him, I think it's fine. 25 minutes, 15 fantasy points, 12 fantasy points, something like that. But I don't know. I'm back on fading him again. I think he's probably going to end up being lower owned. I'd rather play like Myron Jones again, sitting there. I know it's a different position, but the Gators have plenty of value here. Myron Jones at 4.7. I know he was awful against Arkansas as well, played over 20 minutes. Look for a bounce back opportunity for him. Played 27 minutes against Kentucky last time they played. Under 5K playing big minutes definitely is intriguing. You have Riley Kugel sitting there at 5.2, playing 25 to 30 minutes pretty consistently. So he's in the mix. Now with Jitterbug, being completely overmatched a lot of times, it looks like Alex Schmismick, trying to say that the best I can, Schmismick, I tried to listen to that before the show, played 20 minutes against Arkansas. He put up 8.6 rebounds, 4 steals on his way to 27 fantasy points. Nobody obviously could have predicted that at 3K. DK went ahead and popped him up to 4K. This is a spot that will be hilarious if people chase, because he's 1K more, so we need about 16 at minimum. We need about 20 really for our tournaments. Do we believe that he's going to hit 20 plus again after barely playing most of the season? He's going to have to hit a couple threes like he did. He got 4 steals. I don't know. That feels like a pretty fishy spot to me. So if he ends up being really popular, I will definitely be backing off of him as well, just because I want to find a little bit different value spots. I think we have them available on this slate, and we have some nice mid-range options if we want to go more towards a more balanced build. So look out for Schmismick, look out for Jitterbug. I prefer Myron Jones. I do still like Quasi Reeves, even though he only played 17 minutes. He came out relatively decent last game, but the minutes just weren't there for him. Still has 20 plus fantasy point upside at that 4.3 price tag. So don't sleep on him there. We did mention that CJ Feldner might play. He did, but he only played 3 minutes. So very, very little playing time there. Still think there's an opportunity for him to see some more minutes. He was awesome at Boston College. He was a very viable fantasy option with regularity. So I kind of like him in throwaway lineups. Kyle Lofton is sitting there at 5.8, still very, very cheap, under 6K. Don't love him either. He has been kind of a tough option all season long to get behind. And now we're looking at his, 5.8, not really there. Alex Fudge, who played 17 minutes last game, so we'll start seeing his playing time come up. But at 5.1, it's a little bit difficult to use him as well. So really got to decide if you want one of those chalkier Jitterbug or Schmismick. Sounds like a law office names there of Schmismick, Jitterbug, LLC. Or if you can go to Myron Jones, Quasi Reeves, maybe get a little bit different. So that game is going to be full of tilt, I already know. Next game on the slate, Vanderbilt versus LSU. Liam Robbins, man, how can we even get away from him right now? He has been so very good. We had a really phenomenal night slate the other night. He was on it. He got 45 fantasy points against Auburn, 24 points, 12 rebounds. He's just playing some of the best basketball of his career. It's looking a lot like the version of him that we saw during his stint with Minnesota when he played with Marcus Carr, right? Like putting up these big 40 fantasy point scores. He was a big fouler during his time at Minnesota, but man, he could really, really put up a big number. His rates are great. Last year for Vanderbilt, condensed season, only played 15 games, had some issues pop up. This year, though, 31.1% usage rate, which is a career high, 27.7% shot rate, which is the best number he's had since he was at Drake. 33% combined rebounding rate. That is a career high. And a 13.9% block rate, which is also a career high right now. It's number 1 in the SEC, number 2 in the country. Drawing 8.2 fouls per 40. That also is number 1 in the country. And obviously number 1 in the SEC, where he's drawing 10 fouls per 40 in 10 SEC games. Liam Robbins is phenomenal. Going up against a very bad LSU team, even if it's on the road, it's a really strong spot to target him. Oh, man, I've been fighting off a migraine, so I might have to step away for a minute and pop some more migraine meds here. So very bad LSU squad. Liam Robbins is going to certainly have the opportunity to nut hard. This LSU team has lost a ton of games. They're 12-15 after having a strong non-con, which was weak in terms of strength of schedule. They lost their only real tough game to Kansas State. They beat Wake Forest by 2 on a neutral court, but they've proceeded to lose every single game in the SEC except one, which was one of their first ones against Arkansas, which is looking like a very horrific loss by Arkansas now. But they even got beat by South Carolina in that game over the weekend. South Carolina was like +8, which was puzzling to me. Not sure why that was the case. I know they were at home, but this LSU team sucks. I don't like to say that about teams. I like to be a little bit more analytics based or just, come correct and say, hey, here's the reason why they suck. They are just poorly coached. This roster does not mesh well together. They are in a conference that is the murderer's row across the board. They're getting outplayed. Their guard play is awful. Adam Miller is not the same guy that we saw hints of during his freshman season at Illinois. Long-term injury, that's to be expected. Derek Fountain has shown flashes. Cam Hayes is Cam Hayes. Justice Hill's a little bit in over his head. Trey Hannibal's in a little bit over his head. They do have talent in Tyrell Ward and Jalen Reed and Justice Williams, as well as Kendall Coleman, who's not playing right now. So they do have talent for the future, but right now this team is just, it's real bad. Tyrell Ward has been the best DFS option on the team the last couple of games, but against South Carolina, he played 15 minutes, had 3 points, 1 rebound, 1 assist, fell off the face of the earth. Now, I was at the book and that game happened to be on TV. So I had the pleasure of seeing Vanderbilt. They've got all the, 20 TVs up on the wall. And for whatever reason, my eyes went to that game. That's what kind of sicko I am. So I'm not sure what Tyrell Ward's deal was there because I didn't sit there to watch the entire game. It was as riveting as it was. I don't know if that was injury related or what. Let me just do a quick look here. Doesn't appear to be, just didn't get minutes. So that's going to be tough to jump on board because if he's not starting like he has been, you certainly can't use him. And even if he's starting, the fact that he played just 15 minutes is obviously a little bit of scary there. He is 4-1 now, so he's not, as good of a slam as he had been sitting there at near min price. But you look at it, the prior 4 games, 21 minutes, 30, 24, and 20. So if he's still in the starting lineup, I don't hate the idea of using Tyrell Ward, but we'll have to see because clearly there is an opportunity for him to get yanked at any time. Justice Williams sitting there at 3K. He was popular for a while. Had 19 minutes against South Carolina after playing 28 against Bama. Then he played 1 minute. I think he started that Mississippi State game, played 1 minute, and then played 4 minutes after that, and then back to 19. So this is just Coach McMahon looking for answers. He's kind of, jacking his freshmen and sophomores around, though, because continually putting them in and out of the lineup and sitting them, that just does something to a kid's, I should say, psyche. And he needs to continue to, give them minutes and not keep pulling them. So this team is an absolute mess right now. I don't even know who we can really use. At this point, KJ Williams is really the only guy you can use, and I don't even feel comfortable using him, even though his price has come down from where it was in over 9K for a lot of the season down to the 8.4 range. He's just not a very good play in my eyes. And normally up against Vanderbilt, you can get some, high upside performers. I do think Jalen Reed at 3K for LSU could be a little bit sneaky if his minutes start trending back up. He's been over 10 fantasy points in 3 of his last 4. So if Tyrell Ward's kind of falling back out of favor, Jalen Reed coming back into favor, that is a play to really look at possibly. But otherwise, I'm really just looking at the Vanderbilt side here. And, of course, Liam Robbins, who I think will just dominate this LSU squad. Other options on Vanderbilt, really not anyone. Jordan Wright, who was so strong next to Scottie Pippen last year, or the last couple of seasons, I should say, not really in play as the alpha on the perimeter. Tyron Lawrence is too high. Miles Stewart is too high. Isaiah Manning is getting his minutes jacked around. So really in this porous game, it's Liam Robbins, or you're just moving on to the next one, which happens to be a very favorable game. Let me here. I'll be right back. You guys can stare at the St. John's jersey. I just got to get some headache medicine. I'm dealing with a migraine. I'll be right back. Should probably start getting some sleep, eh? I know we don't sleep till May, but getting might be too old to be staying up all the month of March like I usually do. All right, next game on the slate is a doozy. Why? That's because the Syracuse Orangemen are on the slate. And what do we do against Syracuse? We target the high post against them. And three-point shooters, obviously, against the zone. That's just not as fun. The industry is hyper-focused on three-point shooters against the zone. But we galaxy brain it around these parts, and we know the high post is going to detonate against them. So, Syracuse, who are they playing? The Clemson Tigers, the same Clemson Tigers who are coached by somebody that I think is actually a decent coach. I know a lot of people don't. Brad Brownell. He's had some really good teams. They've made some noise. They've underperformed throughout the year, his tenure. They're 19-8 this season. They had a really nice, strong 40-point win against Florida State. And then they turn around and lose by 10 on the road to Louisville. That's tough. They need to win this Syracuse game. How are they going to do it? Obviously, they have some horses they can rely on here. PJ Hall, who I love, of course. I know you guys are thinking I'm going to be all about PJ Hall. He's 8'7". That's a high price to pay, but he's definitely got to be considered. He'll spend some time at that high post. Hunter Tyson could spend some time at that high post. He's at 8'5". He's pretty expensive too. It's actually going to be Chase Hunter, though, that is my favorite play of the three or anyone on Clemson. And that might surprise you, but I've been rolling with Chase Hunter the last couple of slates, and he's been panning out for me quite well. Now, the price has continued to go up because of his firm play. 6-2 against FSU, he felt like a no-brainer. I was all over him there. I was all over him against Louisville as well. Now we're dealing with the price that's over $7K. But I think we'll see him take some time at the high post as well. So this looks like it'll be a timeshare at that position, and they'll rotate through. So we're not going to get the full 100% meal deal of one guy playing that high post, and that's okay. Even 15 minutes at the high post, you could see a guy put up like 20 fantasy points during that time. It's just such a plentiful and amazing spot to play. You can really rack up assists, shots. If you're hitting a jumper, you've got give and go. You can pass to this, the 3-point shooter. If it's not there, they're cutting to the hole. There's just so many opportunities. You've got a good angle on rebounds. There's just so many ways that you can tear this zone up from that spot. And he's flirted with triple doubles a few times. You see against Louisville, 15, 5, and 6. That was a pretty strong performance. He had a down game against Miami where he only scored 6 points, but he had 6 assists, 4 rebounds, trending towards that. 15, 4, and 4 against North Carolina. So contributing in the 3 main categories with regularity, we could see him have a really nice game here. He's the player that, like I said, I'm really kind of the most interested in. And the price is affordable, reasonable, balanced build or not. And then for GPPs, or if I happen to have the salary available, then I'm going to be able to go up and pay for a guy like Hunter Tyson or PJ Hall, who are all great options. PJ Hall came back way sooner than we thought. Looking at his rates, 30% usage, 32% shot rate. Chase Hunter, 26% shot rate. Hunter Tyson, 22% shot rate. Hunter Tyson shooting 41% from long range. PJ Hall, 40. Chase Hunter, 36. Brevin Galloway, 31. And RJ Godfrey, who is a very exciting freshman, shooting 37%. So there is a myriad of options here on Clemson that can knock it down from long range. They also have Chauncey Wiggins, the other freshman, who's a 6'10 kid. He's shooting 46% from long range on 28 attempts. He's not playing a ton of minutes, 15 to 16, but when he's on the floor, he's jacking. And he's hit 4 triples in his last 3 games alone on 6 attempts. Perhaps another kind of sneakier GPP value that you can, throw into your lineup if you're planning on doing a MME mini max type of build. He's only $3K at min price, getting 15 minutes here. He could definitely pay that off. In 2 of his last 3 games, he's hit over 4X. So Chauncey Wiggins, interesting play. Brevin Galloway is maybe a little bit priced up now at 6'1". He was a nice play for a while. RJ Godfrey sitting there at 3.5. He was getting additional minutes for a nice 2 or 3 game stretch. He's kind of leveled out now, so he's not really technically in play, but at 3.5, he could pop here. I like his play style against the Syracuse zone. Clemson has a number of weapons that actually can really do some damage here against the zone. So priority order, and it has to do with price, Chase Hunter, then it's Hunter Tyson, then it's PJ Hall. I think PJ Hall is last on the list for me, and that's sad for me to say, but it's just because I think that the production for all is going to be so good. I want to take the discount. And I might just play 2 of them, which I typically like to do against Syracuse when it's obvious. And this is a very obvious spot. Looking at PJ Hall before I move on, he has scored 30-plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4. Looking at Hunter Tyson, he's cooled off a little bit with PJ Hall crushing, but he's scored 24-plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 5. And I already mentioned Chase Hunter, who has been extremely productive over his last few games, 27, 28, and 31 fantasy points. The Syracuse side, you certainly have to look at them. Clemson is a fantasy-friendly unit as well. They're so up and down, Jekyll and Hyde. You never know who's going to show up there. Jesse Edwards had a really one of his worst games, I think, of the season, and quite possibly, in 2 years, under 20 fantasy points against Duke in 37 minutes. I don't know how that could be. They held him to 3 shots. He's been taking 14 to 15 shots each game, but 3 shot attempts there against Duke. They did a really nice job containing him. That did get his price down $500 from 9.7 to 9.2. I certainly like him, but on the road, if he gets a bad whistle and picks up some foul trouble, which is something that maybe doesn't plague him as much as other bigs, but it's definitely something that's on my mind. But he's very much in play at 9.2. Judah Mintz at 7.7 and Joey Girard at 7.4. Both of those, I think, are strong mid-range plays. Judah Mintz has been a very talented freshman, very consistent, 25-plus fantasy point per game scorer. Looking at his rates, let's pull those up real quick. 27.5% usage rate, which is tops on the team, 26% shot rate, which is only behind the 28.3% shot rate of Joey Girard. So both guards, look for them to play most of the game. Jesse Edwards to play most of the game. Those 3 spots are solidified for Coach Boeheim. He's playing those guys 35-plus minutes whenever possible. Now, some of you got baited into playing Chris Bell last game, which obviously didn't work out. He ended up playing 11 minutes. After he played back-to-back games over 34. And you have to remember that Boeheim, if somebody farts in his direction the wrong way, he's going to suddenly yank their minutes regardless of how they're playing. So he went from playing 34 minutes to 11 in the blink of an eye. He could come back and play 34 minutes again in this game, but I'm not willing to take the risk on him. And I know he's cheap, so 4K, there's not a huge risk there. But it's not like he's 3K and we can eke out like 10 fantasy points and feel okay about it. At 4K, he still has to do something close to 15 to 16, anything under that. And I think you're kind of in trouble, right? Because these raw points are such a premium lately with all these landmines that you're not able to cover a 2x 4K play as well right now at this point in the season. Benny Williams sitting there at 3.1. He has kind of almost completely fallen out of favor. I actually thought it sounded like he was going to leave the program, but alas, he's gonna stick it out for right now. And then Justin Taylor, who played 20 minutes in their last game, but he could see a minute spike. So really, and I guess I should mention Malik Brown, who played over 30 minutes as well last game. He's priced up, though, at 6.3. Do I want to speculate on him? No, he's been a pretty solid play, but at this price, there's just too much risk there. It's different when we were getting him at 3.3. We could take that shot, and the minutes are there, but he's the 4th and sometimes even 5th option on the team, and he's no longer a bargain price. So keep your Syracuse exposure in Maine pretty much to Jesse Edwards and Judah Mintz, but Joe Girard can be in the mix. He's more of a GBP play, takes a lot of shots, doesn't contribute a ton in the other categories, but he does have 40 fantasy point upside and could definitely do some damage here against this Clemson team. When you look at it, oh, man, brutality. Clemson's three-point defense is fairly mediocre. They are much better two-point defense, Might they be able to keep Jesse Edwards out of the lane and force Joey Girard and Judah Mintz to shoot? And if that's the case, Joe Girard does become interesting with 15-plus shot attempts. All right, moving on here to the Virginia-BC game. Virginia has been a totally just more bummer team than usual. I don't have the word for them right now, but they have just been horrific for DFS. They're winning games and they're grinding them out, and they're going to be fine to bet on as a second weekend team. But man, doesn't it just feel like they're not going to be I don't think they're going to be a 1 seed. I guess if they win out, then that's in play. But doesn't it feel like they're going to end up playing a 14 or a 15? And might history repeat themselves if they catch a hot shooting team? Because they just don't have the offense to keep up with somebody who starts out hot. And we know in the tournament it's all about runs. College basketball is all about runs anyways. But in the tournament, it's really, really difficult to withstand a punch in the mouth at the beginning, because these are, at the end of the day, these are still kids, under 21, most of them. Think about how you felt at that age and mentally how weak you probably were at that age. Not that I'm trying to talk smack to you right now, but mental toughness is a really difficult thing to come by at that age. And when you come into a tournament game feeling excited and all of a sudden, the other team knocks down 3 threes and you've missed your first 4 shots, and suddenly you're looking at the scoreboard and it's 15-3. Suddenly it's 30-11. That starts looking like an insurmountable amount. I'm not saying that's going to happen to Virginia, but man, they are susceptible to it happening. They had to grind it out against Louisville, which they almost didn't, because offensively they were struggling. They had to grind it out against Notre Dame. Those are 2 very bad teams in the ACC. They looked actually pretty good against NC State, which is a disappointment because I know NC State's been so good. And then they grinded it out against Duke team, a Duke team that I feel is fairly mediocre, but I'm also anti-Duke. Now, when they last played Boston College, they were on point. They won 76-57 at their house. In that game, Armand Franklin was still in the midst of his crazy play, had 18.7 rebounds, a block, and 2 steals. Jaden Gardner, who had fallen off for a lot of the season, he kind of bounced back, had an 18-6 game there. Isaac McNeely, who is still a sneak value for my money, he hit a couple of triples in that one, had 12 points, 4 rebounds. Reese Beekman had 11 points, 9 rebounds. Otherwise, not a lot from him. On the BC side, Quentin Post had a very nice game, 24 points, 6 rebounds, 2 assists, and 2 blocks. And Maul Mackay Ashton Langford had 12 points, 5 rebounds, and 2 assists. Everyone else was shut down for BC. Now, this game is going to be on BC's floor this time. We have some value. Quentin Post's price is getting outrageous. He's, I'm the biggest Quentin Post fan there is. I've used him so much throughout the years, but I can't really envision paying $9K for him. He's really going to settle in and has settled in as this, 25 to 28 fantasy point per game scorer. He's fouled out in back-to-back games against Pittsburgh and FSU. Those were on the road, and he was under 30 minutes in each of those. He did still have 32.5 fantasy points against FSU last time out. And like I said, he had a pretty strong outing against Virginia for almost 40 fantasy points before. If anyone on BC is going to be able to handle Virginia and put up a nice score still, it is him. But that's just a really high price to pay. I think we're looking at more GPP category there for him as opposed to using him in our main lineups. Now, BC got DeMar Langford back. He played 20 minutes. Let me pull up their box. It'll be easier to look at there because we do have some cheapies on BC that I still want to look at, even though it's a tough spot, just, some GPP looks. Now, they rolled this as a starting lineup still, even with DeMar Langford back. And we could see Langford bounce back into the starting lineup here in his second game back. He was a starter before he missed, 4 or 5 games. But they still went with Jaden Zachary, Devin McLaughlin, Maul, Quentin Post, and Prince Aligbe. Prince Aligbe had 10 and 7. He looked pretty solid. Devin McLaughlin had probably his best game of his career. His young career still, 16 points, 7 rebounds, 2 blocks, made 10 of 10 at the foul line. Closer than the expected game against Florida State. Down the stretch, McLaughlin got to the line a lot. DeMar Langford, 20 minutes off the bench, and Chaz Kelly, another talented freshman, played 18 minutes off the bench. So I like Devin McLaughlin to a degree. He's cheap enough at 4-5 to consider. The minutes have gone up. He's played 21 plus in 3 of his last 5. However, with Langford back, that seems like it's going to, diminish slightly. It's only probably a matter of time, but he made his case for more minutes there. Might Prince Aligbe be the victim of DeMar Langford being back? Possibly. He hasn't looked as good as McLaughlin lately, but over the total course of the season, Ligby has been a really strong play for them. And then, of course, the other freshman guard they have, Chaz Kelly, has played 18-plus minutes in 4 straight games. Still a worthy GPP look at 3.7, but you could tell last game the minutes were starting to go down as well. So I'd like to see another one out of DeMar Langford and see how those minutes shake out. Even, Jaden Zachary, who had been pretty decent the last couple of games and scored over 20 last game. His minutes have, they dipped slightly from the Pittsburgh game to FSU, but he's still sitting around 30 minutes. He's probably the most protected other than Maul with Langford back. But I do think that they're going to still use this group of Aligbe, McLaughlin, and Kelly to a degree. I'm just not sure that they're going to get enough minutes to be like upper tier plays, but definitely at least intriguing at these prices. I don't think people are going to really look at them, but I would like to see how it shakes out with Langford back for another game or two. On the Virginia side, it's just grind it out and get out of there. Armand Franklin at 6.5, Reese Beekman at 7K. Reese Beekman just, not normally scoring enough. The Louisville game was a huge disappointment. He was just so awful in that one. But he got back to taking double-digit shots against Notre Dame, 4 for 12 from the field, had 11, 4, and 5, got to 26.5 fantasy points. So a little bit better there for him. And at 7K, he's at least in play. Typically a main team guy, like we're probably looking at 3.5 to 4x from him. I don't know how much over he'll go, just because I think that, again, Virginia will just gut this one out. Armand Franklin at 6.5 with his high usage and high shot rate, he's in play. He was playing out of his mind mid-season, scoring 30-plus fantasy points, then fell off a little bit. Now he's been scoring over 21 fantasy points or more in 3 straight. A little bit leery of him, though, because I know the second I bite back on him, he's going to hurt me. Ben Vanderplas has played 28-plus minutes in 4 of his last 5. He's looked pretty solid. Jaden Gardner's price is 6.7. He scored 27 fantasy points against a bad Notre Dame team. It seems like his minutes have solidified again. So there are some plays here on Virginia, but none of them super exciting. If you want to continue to get a little cute, I do recommend going back to Isaac McNeely in at least some of your alt builds. I know he only had 8 against Notre Dame, but he still played 20 minutes. He took 5 shots. 3 of those were triples. That's really his game. And he also contributed 4 rebounds. So seeing him contribute a little bit more in other categories beyond just scoring makes him that much more intriguing to me. He's only 3.8. He's probably getting 20 to 22 minutes at worst here. And he's going to take, 5 to 8 shots. He could very easily hit 2 or 3 triples and pay this one off. So I like McNeely, and I think that he's at least worth getting some GPP exposure to. All right, Butler back on the slate here playing against DePaul. They're back against another poor team. Butler ended up being a really solid and semi-popular play on the last slate, which they played Georgetown. They lost 68-62. How embarrassing, right? But Jaden Taylor scored 21 points, 4 rebounds. He was solid. Eric Hunter had 7, 8, and 5 with 2 blocks and a steal. He was ridiculously solid. Ali played 30 minutes, scored 11 and 3. He was finally pretty decent. Jalen Thomas played because Manny Bates couldn't. 30 minutes for him, 6, 7, and 4 steals. He was really solid. Chuck Harris played 21 off the bench. Nobody else really got any minutes there. So with Manny Bates, he came back way faster than expected too after a supposed surgery. But we'll see what happens here with his shoulder and if they're going to use him here against DePaul. Obviously, they don't want to do further damage. Sitting there at 7-8, he's not playable, even though it's a great match against DePaul, because I don't know if that shoulder could flare up at any minute if he does play. So we'll monitor the news. It is during the second wave of games. If he misses, Jalen Thomas certainly has to be considered. Back-to-back games of 30 minutes. Has gone up 1K because he scored that 25 fantasy points, but the DePaul matchup is a dream. Ali's price has jumped up to 5.1 after he was down below 5K. Still not that hot on him, but again, 30 minutes is 30 minutes. And if they're looking at a 6-man rotation, all of these guys have to be in consideration. The only one I wouldn't play is Eric Hunter at 6'4". I know he was solid, 30 fantasy points against Georgetown, but that's just too high of a price to pay for Eric Hunter with his propensity to disappear at a pretty consistent level of disappearing. I can't do it. Seamus Lukosius, he's playing over 30 minutes, 7K. He's fine. His upside hasn't been that high lately. If anything, Jaden Taylor is a pretty strong play, but his price is also really high. So I think the matchup, although great, I don't have a ton of excitement for any of the Butler guys outside of, Jalen Thomas, because I know his minutes are going to be high, and then a GPP shot or two with Jaden Taylor, and that's pretty much it. Everyone else I'm kind of looking off. Maybe Ali, but he just hasn't been the same guy that we saw while he was in the MAC. Now, Butler's been horrible. DePaul side of things is at least intriguing. I don't love them either in this game. These two teams met early January. The first team, Butler, won 78-70. This was a game that Eric Hunter did crush. He had 23 real points. Maybe he does that again. Off the bench, Jaden Taylor had 16. But Emoja Gibson, 16 points, 8 assists, 2 steals. Yor and I had 14 points, 3 blocks, 4 rebounds. And Deshaun Nelson had 14 points, 6 rebounds, and a block. Jalen Taylor, Terry, and Errol Penn, and Javon Johnson were mostly ineffective on the offensive side of the ball. I think Nick Ngenda is interesting. He's back. He's blocking shots. That's his game. 6'4" is a little bit high, but look at what he's done in his first 2 games back and against opponents that were very fantasy friendly, similar to what he's going to get here against Butler. St. John's, 11, 6, and 8 blocks, fouled out in 27 minutes. Against Xavier, 5 points, 8 rebounds, 4 blocks, fouled out in 21 minutes. So he's going to foul out because that's what happens. He's always trying to block shots. He's always had a high foul rate. But if Manny Bates doesn't play, he's definitely going to be looking at, a minimum of 3 blocks with the way Butler drives to the hole and possibly more. The kind of surprising thing for me is the fact that he's taken 9+ shots in each of the 2 games that he's played. Typically, Ngenda, mostly gets his stuff on cleanup, buckets, putback, stuff like that. He's not really featured in the offense, but he's getting so much shots up as compared to what he normally gets up. He has to be definitely in consideration. His usage rate through 2 games is 30%. Shot rate is 28%. Defensive rebounding rate, 25%, block rate, 25%. Obviously, that's through 2 games. So extremely skewed numbers. But the course of his career, he's always been a very strong shot blocker. His block percentage for his career is right around 8.5 to 9. His rebounding rate is on the offensive side is right around a career high or career average of 8.5%. He's doing quite well throughout, and that's what he's known for. So off the bench against St. John's, into the starting lineup against Xavier. Expect him to probably start. The shot attempts, if this continues, it wasn't as if he didn't shoot last year, but I'm just not accustomed to maybe seeing him take double-digit shots that often. If that's going to continue, then he's definitely in play. But 6'4" to me it's a little bit of a high asking price, but a lot of that will depend on what happens with Manny Bates. Unfortunately, Caleb Murphy is dead. Stick a fork in him. He is done. 3.8K. It's Caleb Murphy. I'd love to use him. I'm always playing the Baba Miller train and Joe Bamisile, and there's guys that I'll just continue to throw out there, even if the industry hates them. But Caleb Murphy is definitely one that I had to bounce off. The only reason I was sticking with him that first part of the season is because he was playing 25+ minutes in each of his first 4 games. But those minutes have evaporated quite quickly. Only played 11 in that overtime game. Can't use Caleb Murphy. Now, Yor does have an injury label. A hamstring is what he's dealing with. So we'll see if he's out. That also makes, Ngenda a strong play because he's going to be manning the middle. Errol Penn's a little bit overmatched in this conference and a little over his head. We're seeing in conference play, he's just not the same guy that he was out of the conference. And Deshaun Nelson, who has blossomed into a very productive, bright young star for DePaul, 6'9". That's going to be a little bit tougher to ask, but without Anai, I'd like to see his rebounding numbers pop up there quite a bit as well. And then Emoja Gibson, you know what you're going to get with him. right around mid-20 fantasy points. 8.2 is a fine price for him. Going to play lots of minutes, going to take 10-plus shots. Now, having Ongenda back is a big help because it does open up things a lot more for him because they have a low post presence that can get it done on offense to a degree. Ioannidis, not so much. They don't have any really post presence. So with Ongenda down there, if, I don't think they'll be doubling him, but it does give them an opportunity to, if they start clogging the lane a little bit, opening up some of those threes, they work it around. Gibson could find himself open for some threes. You look at his 3-point shot attempts, they're quite high, but with the 2 games with Ongenda, he's had 8 attempts and 7, and he's been shooting quite well. 71% against Xavier, 37% against St. John's, 71% a couple of weeks ago against Marquette, 75% against Georgetown. He's knocking his threes down. So the 8.2 price point is maybe a little bit on the high side, but it's at least in play because of that high shot rate and his ability to can some triples. Crawdad Corey, where's the CBB room in the FTN Discord? Well, it is. Let me tell you. Tell you. So if you're looking at the CBB Discord or the FTN Discord right now, sorry, I got just a pounding headache. So if you see on text channels where it says general and then MLDB DFS announcements, all that, if you go down towards the bottom there, it should be a little bit higher, but it's underneath MMA DFS and right above NHL DFS. So if you go down towards the bottom and see Sleeper, PrizePicks, NASCAR, NHL, then you'll get to CBB DFS. As long as you have, you should have access to all of it depending on your sports package. So I'm not sure what your Discord name is, but you can hit me up at dubdeuces85 on Twitter if you're having a problem seeing that and you have a sub that should have it. All right. Moving on here. Next game on the slate. So that's it for DePaul. It's an okay game. Ole Miss versus Auburn. How do we not – man, this slate's kind of awesome. How do we not love Janai Broome? I hope the industry kind of gets away from him. Broome had some injury stuff, going on here recently. An ankle issue that he picked up in the Missouri game. It cost him some playing time there, but against Vanderbilt, he played 29 minutes, 8 for 15 from the field, 31 fantasy points. Didn't seem to have any issues. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm going into this with Janai Broome healthy, ready to go, and having a spectacular matchup against a undersized Ole Miss team that is suddenly turning into a very strong DVP spot. They don't have the height and they do have the toughness, but as far as like being able to stop any of the opposing bigs with any size, they haven't had any success at all. We saw over the weekend going up against Mississippi State, my man Tolu Smith, who I took a shot at on Saturday, had a very strong 17, 12, and 5 game. Did eventually foul out in the overtime, but very strong there. I know he had a rough start today. The Florida game, when they played that one, Colin Castleton, unfortunately, that was the game I believe he got hurt. He only had 3 points, but he had 3 rebounds, had 3 blocks, had a lot going on the inside there. So it's hard to use that one. But going over to the South Carolina game, Josh Gray had 13 rebounds against this Ole Miss team. He's been crushing it. Going into let's go to Vanderbilt. Liam Robbins went nuts, 19 and 12 against this Ole Miss team. It was a very strong outing for him because, again, this front court is just very undersized. They did a good job on Oscar, but Oscar Tshiebwe just not playing at that same level that we're accustomed to, as I already said. This is a spot for Janai Broome to break the slate. I'm curious to see if people kind of look off the almost 9K price for him. He's not generally that highly owned this entire season because I think there's a thought that his upside isn't there and that he's kind of stuck in this mid-30s. But he put up 50 against Georgia. He put up 45 against South Carolina. He put up 42 against Ole Miss at Ole Miss last time they played. That was a 19.11 rebound game. So that whole thought that I hear about him not having the upside is obviously malarkey. Yes, drop the word malarkey. Let's go. 8-9 is great play. He's one of my favorite upper tier, higher price plays. Him and Liam Robbins, if you can get those two in there, you got to be feeling really good. However, there is a matchup here where Alabama's facing South Carolina. So Brandon Miller, and I know there's some shit going on there with guns and stuff. That's a fantastic matchup. Armando Bacot's playing Notre Dame. That's a fantastic matchup. NC State's playing Wake Forest. That's a fun fantasy-friendly game. And Houston's playing my boys at Tulane. Houston getting a very fantasy-friendly matchup against Tulane. And also, I'm being put to the test here because, I always stack Tulane when they're on the slate. So there's a lot of different options you can use here that are all in great spots. This is one that definitely feels like a studs and scrubs build if you can get as many of those guys in there, because there are those fantastic matchups. I think Broom's going to be the forgotten man. People are going to look to Bacot. People are going to look to Miller. Keegan Murray's always popular. Or did I say Keegan Murray? Man, I must be tired. Chris Murray. Basically the same trajectory, right? His brother, they're doing the same thing, playing that well. He's always popular, just like Keegan was last year, and Armando Bacot's always popular. So people just aren't going to have the salary to use Broom here, but at home against Ole Miss, the team he already dominated for 42, sign me up all day for that one. And if you can't afford to get to Broom, then I think you definitely want to use his counterpart in the front court, Jalen Williams, who has a really strong season of one of the more improved players by far in the SEC. He put up 30 against Vanderbilt. He's put up a really strong, 20-plus fantasy points in each of the last 5 games. It goes back further than that. His game against Ole Miss when they played, 12 points, 3 rebounds, 5 assists, 25.7 fantasy points. Certainly a strong number at this price point of 6.8. So to me, you want to play one of those guys, and you might even be able to play both, like playing the two of them together in some GBPs. Like, people aren't stacking the same position very much, but how often has Grant Basile, Justin Mutz together worked for us? How often has played, 2 Miami guys in the backcourt worked for us? How often has, I can give you so many examples of stacking. NC State guys, we've done it. Wake Forest guys, we've done it. Tulane guys, we've done it. So stacking is really a lost art, I think, in CBB. And people just, when they do it, they're thinking, well, I got to play a guard with a forward because the 2 forwards, they can't eat together. But time and time again, we see it happen. So I think Williams and Broom could each dominate this matchup. But if you're not able to afford Broom and you're hell-bent on paying up for one of the other guys, which is fine, then I think you want to pencil in Williams into your build. It just seems like a massive mistake if you don't. Wendell Green, let me get my charger here. Wendell Green has always got to be in consideration, playing big minutes, taking high shots, but I just prefer the big. So he's kind of falling off for me, but he's always a high-level GBP play. My man, No Braids Flanny, Alan Flanagan, he's been kind of falling off a little bit again after a hot start to the season. So he's probably not in the player pool for me in this matchup, although I don't hate him. And then Katie Johnson, who had been a strong value, his price is up to $5K. Underperformance against Vanderbilt, but 2 straight games before that, over 25 fantasy points, at least in consideration because of his high usage rate, high shot rate. But he went through a stretch, through January and a lot of December where he just wasn't usable. So again, give me Johni Broom, give me some Jalen Williams, and I'll move on from there. I love this matchup so much that I would even look at Dylan Cardwell, who went off against Missouri once Johni Broom went down. Cardwell could nuke this matchup as well if Broom were to have any issues with that ankle. But I don't think he's going to. It doesn't look like he's going to. He looked just fine in their last game. On the Ole Miss side, we have kind of a Matthew Morrell at 6'9", which is a really great price for him, and then just a bunch of guys. Jermaine Brakefield has been really quite good in this alpha role. Put up 40 last game. Put up 36 plus in 3 of his last 5, 26 plus in 5 straight. So the price is warranted at 7.2, but and he's just, he's been actually surprisingly the main benefactor of Deshaun Ruffin stepping away from the program. because he's just played really well. He did have 26 fantasy points against Auburn last time. So he's definitely, I guess, in play, but that's just one of those guys that I feel really rough about paying that price for. I'm really kind of looking to pay down a little bit more to, Matthew Morrell, who has a high usage rate, a high shot rate, has scored 22 plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games, which includes a 32 against Georgia. He's got, lately his peripherals have been strong, 6 assists against Mississippi State, 5 against Georgia, 7 rebounds against Georgia, 5 rebounds against Florida. So contributing in other categories besides just scoring, playing most of the game. He doesn't leave the floor very often, and he's kind of an unsung hero or somebody who the industry continues to overlook. So I'm a big Matthew Morrell guy. I would be using him for 300 less than Brakefield, but every time I try to write Brakefield off, he comes out with 30 plus. So I won't continue to write him off, but I prefer Morrell. And then the values on this team, we can pretty much just move aside from them. Ty Fagan, Robert Allen, Jay McGinnis. There's not a lot to necessarily get excited about here, so we can look elsewhere. Emory Abram is playing big minutes. He's sitting there at 5-1. He hasn't been particularly very good lately, but played 38 minutes in the last game. Maybe he's worth a GPP shot there if you're looking to expand your player pool just a little bit. All right, moving on to the next game here. We are talking Alabama versus South Carolina. Bama should absolutely destroy this matchup. Now, we have 2 paths we can go here with Brandon Miller because he's way too talented and way too good. This South Carolina team stands little chance of stopping him. Now, it came out earlier today about the gun stuff that Brandon Miller supposedly, I would say allegedly, gave a weapon that was used in a murder. But if that was the case, wouldn't the DA, and I'm not a criminal expert, wouldn't the DA charge him? They're saying they don't have anything to charge him with. So I'm guessing it's because it's technically hearsay and they don't have any proof there. But what I'm getting at is that this could be weighing heavily on his mind. And if it is, he's not going to be focused on the task at hand, which is winning this basketball game and playing at a high level. So that makes me a little uneasy about using him at 9-3 because, again, we're talking about kids here, 18, 19-year-old kids. I don't know if there's going to be pressure from the administration for Oates to, play him less. I don't think he's going to get suspended or anything because if there's no crime, there's no reason to suspend him. But this is going to be something that is talked about whenever Alabama's on the slate or that program's around. People are going to be chatting about this. So I'm not going to mention it every time they're on the slate. I did want to mention it tonight, and I do think that there could be a little bit of an issue with Miller. Maybe we see less minutes if it turns into a serious blowout, or maybe he comes out flat and just doesn't pan out. There's just too many other options in equally as good of matchups, and perhaps at home even, or a little cheaper, or they don't have this lingering issue with a murder hanging over their head. Not that he had anything to do with it. As I said, it was allegedly that he gave a gun to someone. So with that being said, I will probably be underweight on Brandon Miller. I'm probably getting too cute or overthinking it a bit, but I just would rather go into it with Broom, Lock, and Load, who I feel just 100% good about. So what that means is I'm going to play the value game with Alabama because we're going to get an opportunity with these cheapies to see some extra time in a blowout situation. The industry loves Javon Quinterly, so go ahead and feel free to play him at 4K. Rylan Griffin's there at 4-1. Nick Pringle had a really, really massive game. You're seeing some of these youngsters for Bama start to play more. Pringle played 21 minutes against Georgia, went for 40.5 fantasy points. Don't expect that to happen again, but 19 points, 12 rebounds, a block, and a steal. He's earned some more minutes. We saw him play 12 minutes about a week or two ago against Florida. He put up 20 during that point. He hasn't really been playing big minutes throughout the year, but you'll go back and I can show you, most of the season he's playing 1 to 2 minutes, right? But the times he's playing double-digit minutes, he's performing. Go back further against LSU. He played 19 minutes back on the 14th of January. This was a 40-point win. He put up 10.7 rebounds, 22.5 fantasy points in those 19 minutes. You go against Mississippi State. He played 20 minutes there. He scored 15 fantasy points, 10 points, 4 rebounds. 19 minutes against Jacksonville State, 33.5 fantasy points, 14 points, 9 rebounds, 2 assists. So most of the time, and then you go back to the very first game of the season, he played 11 minutes. He had 15 fantasy points. Anytime he gets double digit minutes, he's performing at a pretty high fantasy point per minute level. The price is 4.3, so I'm not really wanting to speculate that he's going to play, because that's if we're wrong and he plays 2 minutes, that 4.3 price it might as well be 9K, because it's just going to be a gaping hole that you're going to have a hard time overcoming. When he was 3.1 in min price, you could take that shot, and if he blanks, okay, fine, whatever. But 4.3, it's a little bit different. So I like a little bit of GPP exposure there, just to heat check maybe and see if he's going to get those double digit minutes. But I'm certainly not going to be using him in my main lineup. That's just a little bit too reckless for me. Instead, and I'm about the most reckless guy that you'll meet. Instead, I'm looking towards the guards. That means for me, obviously Quinterly, who I'm less high on than most. Namari Burnett, who I am the highest on. Dom Welch, who we saw play 15 minutes in the blowout. He did have 8 points. He hit all 3 of his shots, 3 rebounds, and a steal. So it's good to see Dom Welch get into it. And then perhaps Rylan Griffin, who's kind of more of a wing, but he played 20 minutes, had 13 points, 2 rebounds, 4 assists. So a really good outing there by Rylan Griffin. If this turns into a silly blowout, look for Mark Sears and Noah Clowney and Brandon Miller to not play that much. Jaden Bradley's already been seeing his minutes dip. Charles Bediako, who's always at the mercy of his fouls. Like the starters, we just saw this in the last game in a blowout. We can see the starters legitimately not play as much. And we're seeing Bama, since the horrific, real bad, embarrassing loss to Oklahoma, where they got drop kicked by 30-something. They came back. They beat Vanderbilt by damn near 60. That was one where we saw all the starters for Bama play less than 27 minutes. So there is a precedence here for Coach Oates to play his starters less in blowouts. We see it more with him than we do with pretty much any other coach in the SEC or at the Power 5 level. Against Florida, when they won 97-69, we saw him. It was a little closer early. We saw 30 minutes for both Sears and Miller there, but Bradley, Clowney, and Bediako all under 22 minutes. So those 3 guys are going to suffer no matter what, even if Miller and Sears play a lot. We're going to see the rotation from Quinterly, Griffin, Welch, Burnett, Pringle, and sometimes Noah Gurley. So I want to target the cheaper or the cheapest guys on Alabama that are going to get minutes. We also have an injury tag for Charles Bediako. Apparently he hasn't been practicing this week. I don't know what the actual injury is, but if he ends up being out, that changes the entire conversation about what I said about Nick Pringle being just the GPP alt play and not a main team play. Now, this game is on the 3rd and final wave of games on the slate, so you will have to stay tuned and really kind of, hover around and make sure that you're available, because if the news breaks and Bediako plays, then that changes things. If he doesn't, then you're in a good position. And what you might do is, to make sure you have the room, put Bediako in your dummy lineup, and if it comes out he doesn't play, you just drop that $400 down to Pringle. I don't think I'd want to play Bediako either way, but that's just one way to make sure that you're able to make a quick and easy swap if it comes down to that. I still like Namari Burnett a lot. He's still affordable at 3.9. Played the 19 minutes against Georgia, 6 points, 4 rebounds, took 6 shots. Against Tennessee in 18 minutes, he took 5 shots, had 14 fantasy points. Did foul out in that game, oddly enough. Against Auburn, he played 17 minutes, took 7 shots. And then 15 minutes against Florida, he took 6 shots. And 21 minutes against LSU, he took 10 shots. That was the game he exploded for us. He's taking heavy shots, most of which are threes. 7 in the last 5, these are his 3-point attempts. 7, 5, 6, 4, 3. 2, 1. No, I'm not counting down. So he's taking a high number of shots. He's still reasonably priced at 3.9. Nobody's going to be looking to him, as I wouldn't suspect. But he's a high pedigree kid. He's got a lot of talent. He has a knack for being around the ball. He has a really strong for the minutes he's played, shot rate at 20.2%, a usage rate of 19.2%. He has attempted 62 triples, so he is firing shots up when he's out there, 36% from long range. He's drawing 4.1 fouls per 40. He does have a higher than usual for his position foul rate at 5.4 per 40, but that's just because the minutes for him have been so, kind of sparingly up and down. He missed so much time between mid-December to mid-January. He was starting games to start the season, right? So this kid obviously Coach Oates had him in the game plan and big plans for him. We saw him, against Jacksonville State. He scored 18 real points. Like, he was playing, each and every game as a starter, and they were looking to him. They were blowout games. So he was part of that starting group that would play less minutes because of the blowout. Now he's on the other side of it, which is actually more interesting. So Amari Burnett, still my favorite of the value plays on Alabama. It's probably a little bit more risky than most people would like. Then Dom Welch at 3-2. He's definitely going into some alt builds for me. 2 of his last 3 games, he's been at 15 minutes, 8 fantasy points, 1 against Tennessee, and then 14 against Georgia. Took all 3 of his shots he knocked down. It was good to see him kind of get back into the mix. At St. Bonaventures, Dom Welch was a pretty streaky shooter, but when he was on, he was on. So I like him more so. Javon Quinterly has the best usage rate amongst the cheap guys. 20 minutes there against Georgia. He's just going to end up in a timeshare with the rest of them. If he's the one that ends up popular, if people are going that route, I just prefer the other options between Griffin, Burnett, and Welch. And like I said, Pringle, I'll cross that bridge when it comes. If Bediako's out, then there's a solid shot that Pringle may start. We could see Noah Gurley, who's min-price. He, played 20 minutes. Gurley was a big part of the rotation last year. He's fallen out this season, but he could easily pop back in and play 20 minutes in a game against South Carolina that Alabama should romp in. Rylan Griffin, 4-1. He's been solid, 19-plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 5. I like Alabama value. No secret there. I don't think they're going to be super popular either way, but they make they make it a little bit easier to fit some of these higher price guys and stack up 2 to 3 of them up top. On the South Carolina side, Gigi Jackson had a couple. There was something. What were they talking about? Something on Instagram where he was clowning on the coaching staff and saying that he's a very young kid. He's like 17, right? He reclassified, but Lamont Paris and company should be playing him more, getting him the ball more. He should not be having to defer and all this. And after it happened, he ended up finding himself out of the starting lineup for a few games and playing way less minutes than usual. 27 minutes off the bench against Missouri, 12 off the bench against Ole Miss, and 16 minutes off the bench against Vanderbilt. However, they put him back in the starting lineup against LSU. He played 36 minutes. He had 20 points, 8 rebounds, 29% usage rate, back on track for Gigi Jackson. So I expect him to be in the starting lineup. The 7-9 price it's high, sure, but his high usage rate, his high shot rate, his very solid defensive rebounding rate, which sits at 17.5%. He's drawing 4 fouls per 40. He's shooting 34% from long range on nearly 150 attempts. His shot rate in conference games is 32.4%, which is the second best in the SEC. His usage rate in conference games is 29.7%, which is the 4th best mark in the SEC. So there's a lot to like about Gigi, or Gregory Jackson if you prefer. A price point that people are just not going to be looking at, but I definitely want exposure to him, and that high usage rate just puts him in play regardless. Now, the Alabama defense has to be respected. I definitely, usually fade against them, especially in the front court, but I'm going to get some GPP exposure because if it turns into a blowout and the Bama, bench and secondary players are playing a lot of that second half, Gigi will have all this garbage time and last 10 minutes of the game to put on a show a little bit. I think we could see him legit put up like 20 fantasy points in the last 8 to 9 minutes of the game if it ends up being a blowout. So that's the kind of angle I'm playing there. Love Josh Gray at 5.5. He has, exploded against Arkansas. He was solid against Missouri. He showed off that matchup against Ole Miss. Against Vanderbilt and Liam Robbins, he still pulled down 12 rebounds. His scoring isn't usually there. He scored 20 real against Arkansas, which is more of an anomaly, but the block shots, the rebounding, the other categories are there for him. Fouls are an issue, of course, but 5.5, this is an intriguing price for him. Even once again in that bad matchup against Bama, because in garbage time, he could absolutely end up, playing quite well and racking up some viable fantasy points for us in the last 5 to 10 minutes. Looking at it on his side, rates-wise, usage and shot rate, just okay, but his rebounding rate is ridiculous. 18.5% offensive rebounding rate, 26% defensive rebounding rate, 6.5% block rate, drawing 3.5 fouls per 40. He does have a 6 fouls per 40 called rate on himself, though. 7 foot, 255 to 260 pounds. He is a very, very fun player if he can control his fouls. The Alabama front court, it's crazy because as good as they are defensively, you look at it, Bediako, he's in foul trouble. They've got, Pringle, Noah Gurley, who doesn't play that much down low. And then Clowney, it's like, man, they don't look that scary on paper, but then you watch the game and they're so fluid on defense and they make it so difficult for their opponents. On paper, looking at it, I would look at it and say, wow, Josh Gray and G.G. Jackson should have big games against these guys, especially with the banged up Bediako. But something about the way that team plays for Oats, they are just a cohesive unit. So tread lightly, targeting against them on a game-to-game basis. But I do like Josh Gray and I do like G.G. Jackson for GPPs. I will probably have somewhere between 10 to 15% of each in either the mini max or if I do the 20 max, whatever, I'm going to get that kind of exposure. Don't like Hayden Brown or Michi Johnson as much. They're priced up as almost 7K. They're just not as, their rates are good. Don't get me wrong, but I just on a game by game basis, they don't have the same type of upside as a G.G. Jackson or even Josh Gray lately. We did see Michi put up 36 against LSU, 20 real points, but he's going to be so reliant on his scoring. He does chuck a ton, but at 7K, a lot could go wrong with this matchup, and I'm just kind of not there with him at that price point. And Hayden Brown put up 34 against LSU and 34 against Missouri. He's been a little bit better, but at 6.8, it's a high price to pay. I think line in the sand, I just want to play G.G. Jackson instead because, again, there's a lot that could go wrong in this matchup for Hayden Brown as well. And the pecking order has kind of pushed him to 4th. Now, there is some value to be had here. Jacoby Wright, who has played 32-plus minutes in 4 straight games, 20 fantasy points against Missouri, 31 against Ole Miss, just 11 against Vandy. You're allowed to have a bad game, Jacoby, and 24.5 against LSU. Another player that could actually thrive here in the garbage time and is taking more shots than maybe you realize, especially from downtown. 5 of 8 from downtown against LSU, 3 of 5 from long range against Ole Miss, and 2 for 4 against Missouri. The assists have been there for him. He's rebounded adequately enough. And overall, Jacoby Wright for 4K and playing 30 minutes a game during SEC play is actually in play. He has been an assassin lately, but overall this season, he's just a tick under 40% with Chico Carter, who is shooting almost 50% from long range, dealing with a knee ailment. It sounds like he may end up missing, which is going to be even better for Jacoby Wright because he's likely going to see his minutes spike up to the mid-30s area. So at 4K, even though, again, the matchup's awful, we're looking at a spot where 35 minutes at 4K, give him 18 to 20 fantasy points. It's a really good spot, even though the matchup sucks, just because he's going to be on the floor for a long time. We saw them play guys like Zachary Davis at times. We saw, Daniel Hankins-Sanford, who's a freshman that they're really high on, and Benjamin Bondsman-Verdonk, who's pretty awful overall. But you take Chico Carter out of the mix, and they're very, very light on scoring guards. So Jacoby Wright is intriguing at that 4K price. And you could argue that, well, what about Michi? Maybe that 7K price point isn't too high on him. He's going to take a lot of shots, yes, but that that the fact that Chico is going to be off the floor as the almost 50% 3-point shooter, which is the 11th best mark in the country, that just means the defensive attention, instead of being spread out for Chico and Michi, they're going to be honing in on Michi as an outside shooter. So I think they handcuff him a little bit more than he would have been, which is why I would look to maybe, like I said, Jacoby Wright for cheaper, or just go get Gigi Jackson, who's going to put on a show in garbage time. I feel pretty confident in that. All right, next game, Iowa versus Wisconsin. The always popular Chris Murray, almost 10K. Count me out on him. Count me out on Philip Rebracha. Count me out on Iowa in general here against Wisconsin. And that could get me in trouble because of the fact that Iowa games are so popular all the time. And their games tend to be really fantasy friendly, playing at that 50 tempo, or their 50th in tempo, I should say. Their offense is 5th in offensive efficiency per Ken Pom. Defense is like 154th, so not as good there. They don't turn the ball over as much. They're top 10 in terms of not turning the ball over, and they're just have always been that way the last 3 or 4 years. Just a very high level DFS team. So it pains me to not want to use them. Chris Murray's got great rates. Rebracha's got great rates. Sanford has shown the ability to break the slate. Perkins has played really well. Aaron Eulis, not so much lately, but he's played well. But this just seems like a low-scoring game. Ken Pom has a 72-71 for Wisconsin, but I feel like it could be even lower scoring than that. And it's going to behoove Wisconsin to slow this thing way down. Wisconsin's 350th in tempo ranking, and their defense is 28th in the country. So clashing styles here. Usually want to defer to the home team to control things. That just means I don't think we can pay these premium prices. Tony Perkins is 6'7". No. Peyton Sanford 5'6". No. As I really thought we were going to be using Sanford a lot this year, by the way. Aaron Eulis at 4'4". I'm not ready to give up on him just yet. He's kind of like Joey Toussaint for me on West Virginia. Keep on having these porous games, but still so cheap, have good rates. Eulis has played over 25 minutes in 3 straight games against the likes of Minnesota, Ohio State, and Northwestern. So he's on the floor. He's just not producing whatsoever. He's low on the pecking order. Perkins' sudden emergence has really hurt him. It seems like the stretch in January where he scored 21 plus fantasy points in 4 straight is way in the rearview mirror and, completely forgotten about. But at 4'4", playing 25 plus minutes, he's at least in play as a value. It's just that Perkins, like I said, is playing so phenomenally. And if you haven't noticed what Perkins has been doing, he put up 42 fantasy points against Illinois, 32 real, 25 against a tough Rutgers defense, 30 against Minnesota, 33 against Ohio State, and then 25 against a always tough Northwestern defense. So it continues. And he took 16 shots against Ohio State. He took 12 against Minnesota. He's just become the third and maybe even second option over Rebracha, and he's playing quite well. But 6'7" is a tough price. If you haven't been using Perkins at this, during this stretch, it's kind of one of those I haven't been using him. I just have to keep fading because I can't pay a premium for him now late, because if he busts against a tough Wisconsin defense, then you totally fished it and cost yourself the day. Rebracha is at least interesting at the low 7K range. He's had back-to-back games under 20 fantasy points, but I like him at this price point for GPPs because I do think he'll be able to rebound at a high level and at least score in double digits, which puts him over the 20 fantasy point mark at 7.3. Can we get closer to 30? It's definitely possible, but he's not main team viable right now at this moment. He might be one of those plays where we look at his PrizePicks number or we go ahead and hit his prop numbers on DK because they've been pretty soft, at least lately. The Wisconsin side is where we'll want to target if we want to target this game at all. Who might that be? Well, Max Klesmit is sitting there at 5K. That's a viable price for him. He's been a pretty nice, role player for them. He's getting a decent chunk of minutes. 5 straight over 30 minutes. It actually goes back further than that. I think it's about 7 or 8. The Fantasy point per minute number is somewhat low, but he's typically going to be around 15 to 20. So the price at 5K, maybe not as great. You're talking a 3X number, but he is cheap enough to at least speculate on. The Iowa, tempo boost that he's getting puts him back more into the 4X range, I think, more often than not here at home. So I think Klesmit is worth looking at. Connor Essien, he's sitting there at 6'3". He's been really good. Predictably, Rutgers was in his shorts. That is something that I said to be careful about on him. I thought McConnell and crew would really make life difficult because he shot so well lately. He shot 0 for 10 in that game. He won't shoot 0 for 10 against Iowa. I know the price isn't necessarily advantageous or all that great, but he's going to take probably, somewhere between 9 to 12 actual shots, if not more. Gets back to knocking them down like he has been, and most of those are from long range, by the way. 7, 10, 7, and 11 3-point attempts over the last 4. Gets to the foul line a decent amount. I like his point. We'll see what his points prop is, but I like him to score, somewhere between 14 to 16 real points. We saw Jordan Davis play 20 minutes last game, scored 20 fantasy points against Rutgers. That's because Connor was struggling so bad. No thanks. And as far as, paying 8-1 for Stephen Crowell, even against Iowa where he could do damage, that it just seems a little bit too high for me. Tyler Wall 7.6 after his price had dropped down in the mid to upper 6K. That's a little too high for me, even though this is a really good matchup on paper for them. And Chucky Hepburn at 6.7, which is still too high price for me as well. So I'm mainly off of this game entirely because I just don't think it's going to be as high scoring as Iowa games typically are. And most everyone on Wisconsin is either priced where they should be or a little bit over. And Klesmit is really the only one that I could see being main team viable. And even then, he's a lower on the totem pole option for us. All right, North Carolina, come on and raise up versus Notre Dame. This is a matchup with the Notre Dame front court that is right up there, with the other great DVP spots for opposing big men. That means Armando Bacot, who is extremely expensive at 10.5, but he should walk over Notre Dame completely. What did he do in their first matchup? Well, I'm glad you asked. 21 points, 13 rebounds, 4 assists, 47.5 fantasy points. Now, he was priced at 9.9 then. Can you imagine? That was back on January 7th. 9.9 for Armando Bacot. I could really go for that price with him right now. But alas, we won't get it. We'll be getting the high water mark of 10.5. Now, it's on the road. You could play the whole, bad whistle. He's been worse on the road. 8.5 fantasy points worse, which is pretty significant. Minutes have been about 4.5 to 5 less. His rebounding is about the same, 1 less rebound per game. Everything else pretty on par. His fouls, though, have been higher on the road, and that's something that typically happens with bigs, right? There's just referees get a little bit, the undisciplined ones get a little bit too involved in the atmosphere, and there's a quote-unquote bad whistle that happens. So if there's a time to fade Bacot, it is when he's on the road, but the matchup is just freaking beautiful. And you look at what he's done on the road in his last 3 ACC games, and it's way better than it looks for the total season. He put up 37.5 against NC State, which was a 16.14 rebound game. They did lose that one. NC State, obviously tough at their court. Against Wake Forest, another road loss. He had 17 and 11 for 32, and a road loss against Duke, 14 and 10. So the last 3 road games, double-doubles and all. The team's lost in those games, but he's looked really, really good. So I think that I definitely want to get him here, but I don't know that I'm as high on him as maybe the rest of the industry will be, just because I think there's a lot that could go wrong. The 10.5 price is high. He might just coast into 32 here if there's foul issues that pop up. I fail to see now if this was reversed and he was back home, I'd be talking about, he's going to score 45 fantasy points. I feel that, he has this 50 fantasy point upside, which he did in that home game. But on the road here, I just feel a little bit leery about him. I think that this North Carolina team, there's a real lack of effort starting to emerge, not from him, but just the rest of the team. And that's just, it's becoming a huge problem for this North Carolina team. Now they could get hot and all those, misgivings will be forgiven. But at this point, Armando Bacot at 10-5 is not as big of a lock and load as maybe we might have thought when this slate first came out or when that matchup was first there. But I'm definitely going to have exposure. Now, if you're going to ask me Bacot or Broom, I know their price difference, but if you can get there to Bacot, I'm going to tell you to play Broom. I'm going to tell you to reroute those salary, that salary to upgrading one of your values to a stronger mid-range guy, because I just feel like Broom for less will either match Bacot or just outscore him straight up. That's where I'm at with it. I like him to outscore Brandon Miller as well. I like him to outscore Chris Murray as well. Right now, Broom is my top pay up at this point. I thought I might be higher. I thought I might be higher on Bacot, but at this moment, when I'm looking to the matchup a little bit deeper and staring at it in the face, I'm just not. Caleb Love at 8K. We can easily fade him there. Pete Nance at 6-1. I think we can probably easily fade him there. Leaky Black at 6-5, who has been much more of an offensive option this season, and somebody that, in the past you would never play over 5K. You can pay the 6-5 price if you want. He's been actually pretty decent on the road. But I think it comes down to either fading North Carolina in your main or banking on a RJ Davis game. And RJ Davis is a big-time volume scorer that shot really poorly against NC State. They did a great job on him, but played 40 minutes. Game before that against Miami, he played 36 minutes. When the shots did fall, he shot 9 for 18 as opposed to 2 for 13, and he put up almost 40 against Miami in terms of fantasy points. So at 7-6, we're getting a nice discount because RJ's been right around 8K. It's not a huge discount, but look at what he's, 8-6, 8-5. All through January, he was in the mid 8K range. He was 7-9 and 7-7 to start the year, but he's mainly been over that 8K mark. So getting this $400 to $500 savings on him, knowing that he's going to take 15 plus shots here, it's a great spot for RJ Davis, and he's at a price point that is very advantageous. So of all the North Carolina guys not named Armando Bacot, RJ Davis is very much in play. Do I like him as much on the road as some of the other options? No, he's another player that is averaging about 5 to 6 less fantasy points on the road. North Carolina just not as strong there as they are in the confines of Chapel Hill. But 7-6 is an eye-opening price and has to be considered. Maybe it's a little more on the GPP side, but I could see using RJ Davis if you forego an 8-5 or 9K or more pay up. RJ Davis in a more of a balanced lineup, I absolutely am on board with doing so. Now, there's chatter about Hubert Davis playing some of his bench guys more. We do have a big-time North Carolina fan in our Discord, and Ertz. We've got fans of just about every team in our Discord. It's kind of nice because you can, pop in there and get their take. But he says that, Hubert Davis says this kind of thing often. And when you go back and look at some of his pressers, he does just kind of saying, want to shake it up and play more guys. But then it gets into the game and they're still going 6 deep. And we saw that against NC State. They rolled their starting 5, Nance, Love, Bacot, Black, and Davis. Puff Johnson actually played 22 minutes off the bench. That was nice to see, but Seth Trimble still barely playing. Tyler Nickel still barely playing. And DeMarco Dunn, who is such a big transfer candidate heading into the offseason, is still barely playing. Now, I think Puff Johnson should continue to play 20-plus minutes. I don't necessarily think at this point he's like first-team All-ACC caliber, like maybe we thought, looking at him last year and what he could develop into. But I do see him being a really solid role player that's going to contribute on the offensive end, surely, but the defensive end more so, and on a rebounding level as well. So that's the type of player that will, once Leaky Black moves on, I could see Puff slide into that Leaky Black role. I honestly think he'll improve his defense and overall improve, a great deal. Looking back, North Carolina's always had their most success when they have a player in that role. A couple of years back, well, a long time at this point, was at Noel. James Michael McAdoo, although he was better on offense, but they've always had like a defensive stopper or a guy that didn't necessarily have to score at a super high level to be able to impact the game. And they're at their best. Deion Thompson, trying to pull names here without going through the page. Marcus Ginyard, like players like that, right? Like it's been a couple of years since they've had players like that. Deion Thompson, that's a good one. I had to dig deep for that one. I think Puff Johnson could turn into somebody like that, like a Deion Thompson, and that's a very good thing to be. And like I said, North Carolina, they just thrive when they have role players on their team like that. And they've got some strong guys coming in. I want to see DeMarco Dunn play. That's the guy that I think he's a solid enough 3-point shooter. He should be playing more minutes. I really am puzzled that he doesn't. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, he's not engaged on every play, but he's also not getting the opportunity to get into the rhythm and play. Seth Trimble's raw, Tyler Nichols raw, but DeMarco Dunn's been there for a season. He's seen, a full cycle. Play the guy, see what he can do. But don't hold your breath that that's going to happen. It would be nice if it did, because they're all min price. And if they were to get even 12 to 15 minutes, I think they'd be intriguing here in this spot. The Notre Dame spot, the Notre Dame side, North Carolina at this point, not a dumpster fire by any means, but they're extremely targetable against. Marcus Hammond has a very high usage rate, high shot rate. He's there at 5K. Now, I know Hammond hasn't been particularly good the last few games, but the shot attempts are still there. And after a couple of sleepy, games against Virginia, he had 18.5 fantasy points, which is certainly puts him in play. It caused him to go from 4 to 5. They're kind of going up and down with him, right? But 20 fantasy points at 5K seems like a pretty solid, watermark for him to hit. He played 25 minutes against North Carolina last time, had just under 15 fantasy points, so it wasn't great, but he was starting to find his footing during that time before he got in the starting lineup. So I do like Marcus Hammond here. I'm not ready to give up on him. We should see Van Allen Lubin play more. Against Virginia, he played only 7 minutes after playing mid-20s, so that's something to keep an eye on there. That was not injury-related that I'm aware of. J.J. Starling at 4.5. His minutes have dumped, with his poor play. When he comes out and plays well like he did against Duke, then he's afforded extra minutes. He played 33. But J.J. Starling's PRA, which has been about 13.5 to 15.5, which seemed like a super slam over, hasn't been. I know he was sick for a while, but at this point, J.J. Starling has not panned out like another freshman in the ACC like Judah Mintz, and it's become a situation where even at this cheap price, I'm not sure we can really use him. Now, the starting 5 for Notre Dame has remained, and what they did was they started Van Allen Lubin last game with J.J. Starling, Marcus Hammond, Cormac Ryan, and Nate Laszewski. They brought Dane Goodwin off the bench there, but he still played 36 minutes, and that's a very Jerry Stackhouse-esque like move to play a guy that would normally be a starter off the bench and give him starter minutes anyways. Trey Wirtz played 26 minutes, and then we saw Matt Zona play 16. And Matt Zona has usually not played, like he racks up the DMP coach decisions. So to see him randomly get 16 minutes is at least interesting. Might we see him play 15 to 20 again? Not so sure about that. The one constant, actually the two constants in the lineup have really been Nate Laszewski and Dane Goodwin, and I guess to a lesser degree Cormac Ryan. So those are the three that you can rely on to play heavier minutes here. A little bit of Trey Wirtz at 4-2 playing 25 minutes. That seems okay as well. But I'm not really trying to speculate too much on those guys because a lot could go wrong. Laszewski's a little bit high for me at 8.3. Although he could be a problem because he drags Baycott out. He can't guard Baycott there. Now Notre Dame does play a lot of zone, and Laszewski won't be hung out to dry in one-on-one situations with Baycott quite as much, but there still will be some high-low action going on there when Baycott gets the ball on the low block. Laszewski's going to have to step up, and he will just get bodied there. So with that being said, against the zone, I don't think that Laszewski is necessarily the guy at 8-3, at 8-3 to be paying for, I think you want to go Hammond, my dude, at 5K, or get yourself a player like Cormac Ryan or Dane Goodwin, who are both under 7K, just under 7K for Goodwin and just over 6K for Cormac Ryan. All right, we're just about done with the slate. We've got Wake Forest versus NC State. Now, Wake Forest games have typically been really strong fantasy games, but lately they haven't been quite as exciting, and we've had some clunkers from Wake Forest. And last time that they played NC State, now this was, it was a month ago already. Feels like just a couple weeks ago. I was hell-bent on stacking that game. It didn't really turn into that great because Cam Hildreth, who at that point had been crushing for us, had a real awful day. 12 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, but he was like, 7-5 or whatever. 32 minutes, he was out there, but just real bad. Tyree Appleby had 18 real points in 40 minutes, but only 7 assists, no other peripherals. Damari Monsanto got hot from long range. He had 22 real points. Andrew Carr had 14 and 9, which was adequate, but I think he was probably a little bit too priced when you look back at it. Matthew Marsh played 22 minutes, 8 points, 8 rebounds, but that fifth starter spot for Wake Forest has been a revolving door between Davion Williamson, Davion Bradford, Matthew Marsh, and Bobby Klintman. All those guys playing, but it was really a tough outing for Wake Forest. And even though they played pretty rough and not that great, they were in the mix and almost pulled it off, but NC State was able to hold on. Now, they got buried by DJ Burns, who scored 31 real points, 9 rebounds, 2 blocks, 2 steals. His usage rate was 48%. Now, you don't typically see, 6'10", guys who do a lot of their damage on the block have usage rates up of 50%. That's like a Marcus Howard level usage rate where they're just taking every shot. DJ Burns took 26 shots in that game. They couldn't stop him. Casey Morcell stood by and watched the action like he does, played 40 minutes. 7 points, 2 rebounds, 2 blocks in 40 minutes. Good job, Casey. Jarkel Joyner played 39 minutes. He had 17 points, 3 rebounds, 4 assists. Terquavian Smith only played the 21 minutes there because he was in major foul trouble, but had 16 points. Greg Gant, out there to get rebounds. He had 10 of them. Ernest Rost and LJ Thomas contributed off the bench, but it was the DJ Burns show. And we're seeing Wake Forest a little susceptible to athletic and active bigs like that because Matthew Marsh at 7 feet, he's a little too slow. Bobby Klintman is a really high-level rebounder and has a ton of talent. It's going to be great. Maybe not great, but he's going to be really good. Still struggling against athletic bigs, guys who can get outdone on the rebound. Same thing with Andrew Carr coming from a lower conference, gifted defense or offensively, but maybe the defense isn't quite to that level. So we saw Norchad Omier 17 and 8, a couple of steals. They gave up 96 to Miami. They end up beating Georgia Tech recently by 1, but we saw Javon Franklin, who stands at a mere 6'7", but plays a lot bigger. 14 points, 15 rebounds, a huge game there against Wake Forest. North Carolina, they did win that game. Armando Bacot had 17-11. Pete Nance had 11 and 10. 2 double-doubles there. Leaky Black had 10 rebounds. We're seeing that consistently happen. Notre Dame, who doesn't have that inside presence, but even then, Nate Laszewski had 18 and 7 when they played Wake Forest. So we're seeing the development here. DJ Burns, of course, destroyed them. We're seeing a situation where athletic rebounders are creating a major issue for them. Even Blake Hinson, who is, most of his work on the wing, but does have the capability to mix it up down low and get rebounds. He had 24 real points against Wake Forest, although he did hit 8 threes in that one. This is just a situation where I feel pretty strongly about Burns in terms of he could repeat what he just did against Wake Forest. His price, we're not getting any discounts at 7-1, but people continue to write him off. I made the mistake of writing him off, last month. Haven't done it since. Alex knows I won't do it. So 7-1, I'll get some exposure here at home. Love Jack Clark still at 6'5". I know he had a clunker last time out. It's he missed so much time. You gotta think that he needs a little bit of more time to get acclimated, but Look at the minutes since he's returned after the BC game in which he played just 10. 31 against Syracuse, he owned as we thought he might. And then the 25 minutes against North Carolina, still 6 points, 8 rebounds, 2 assists. It wasn't a total clunker at 6'2". We just wanted a little bit more. So at 6'5", going up against Wake Forest, do not sleep on Jack Clark. I actually like him a lot once again, and I don't expect a lot of people to be going in his direction. And then Turk Smith, 8'9", Jarkel Joyner at 8'5". Not priority plays, but definitely strong luxury plays. Jarkel Joyner, officially a brand favorite for life after what he did against Syracuse. I think he's a fantastic play across the board if you can afford him. Not a, like I said, a priority play at this 8'5", because we're probably looking at him hitting somewhere in the 28 to 35 range, which is fine, but we're going to need a little bit more at this price. And there's a lot of viable 8K to 9K guys. And Turk Smith, who I feel real bad about not rostering him all that much, but Jarkel Joyner's been both a gift and a curse. It's been good for him as terms of real-life basketball because he's transformed his game a little bit. He's not just a one-dimensional scorer. He's got a very high assist rate. He's contributing, defensively. He's getting steals. He's rebounding, actually, averaging almost 4 rebounds a game. He's just not required to put up these huge scores because he has help. There's other guys on offense that can do it. And now Jack Clark's in the mix. He's going to be, required to score less than he normally would too. Now, if the game's close, NC State needs a bucket, they're going to Turk Smith. Please believe. But I just don't know if it's necessary to pay 8-9 for him. So he's taking a hit in DFS, but his NBA stock and real life basketball stock is obviously going up. So Jack Clark, the most main team viable for me personally. Then it's DJ Burns, who I think just owns this matchup again. And then if I'm going to pay up between one of Jarkel and Turk, I'm going a little bit cheaper at Jarkel Joyner, but obviously I have no issues using either. Now, looking at Burns, he's right around this mid-20s for playing time, right? 35 against BC, 25 against Syracuse, but he fouled out in 24. Going up against Armando Bacot, he had 4 fouls, 27 fantasy points. The price of 7-1, I think it feels high, but when you work through it and you look at what he's been able to do, how many shots he's taken, the usage rate, the rebounding rate, everything and combined, the 7-1 price is just really good. And the 26 shots he took against Wake, it wasn't as if they were a blip. 2 games later against Georgia Tech, he took 21. And then 2 games later against Boston College, he took 15. 2 games later against North Carolina, he took 15. So if it's an every 2 games thing where he's taking 15 plus shots, we're not on that rotation, unfortunately, here against Wake Forest, but we are dealing with a great DVP spot for DJ Burns. And when you look at it, I want to just tell you he has great rates. Let's look at it and you can see for yourself. 27.3% shot rate, 28% usage rate, an offensive rebounding rate of 9.5%, a block rate of 4%. He's shooting just under 60% from the field. He is a real deal when it comes to putting up fantasy points and just being an overall menace in the paint. And I think he's going to be able to push around this Wake Forest front court once again. So do not sleep on the man, DJ Burns. All right, the last game on the slate, ask for Tulane. We've been getting Tulane more. Tulane just never fails us. It's Tulane versus Houston, unfortunately. But how can I possibly not have exposure to my man, Jalen Cook? He's priced way up, 9.6K. Kevin Cross, who we've loved as well, way up at 9.1. Now, Jalen Forbes is only at 7.8, which is a really sneaky price for him. Sion James, and, RJ McGee, Tylen Pope, some of these other options, they're just, they're okay. This is a 3-man race here for Tulane fantasy points between Forbes, Cook, and Cross. Now, Cook has not been failing us very often since the calendar turned to 2023. PRA-wise, he has been a slam. Nobody's hitting the over on their PRA at a more consistent rate than him, other than, I think, Santa Clara's Brandon Podziemski, the Illinois transfer. He's been hitting the over 30.5 PRA with regularity. Santa Clara games have been super profitable for us, and Jalen Cook Tulane games have been super profitable for us. Let's look at what Jalen Cook's been doing. This is a Jalen Cook. This is now the Jalen Cook appreciation portion of the show. 40 shots in the past 2 games, 55 fantasy points in back-to-back games, 45 fantasy points against Wichita, 42 against SMU. Now, Now, Memphis held him a little bit. He had 33, but he turned the ball over 11 times there. They still won that game, by the way. And then the last time they played Houston, in 39 minutes, you're looking at a guy never leave the court. 19 shot attempts. He had 15 real points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists for 30 fantasy points. So Waddell's price that he was then was right around 7.9 to 8K. Hitting 30 to 32 is phenomenal. Still good, strong. Maybe not superly overly impressive, but it's value. 9.6, we obviously need him to hit more, and since he's been popping these 50s, it's caused his price to balloon. So unfortunately, it pains the hell out of me. I don't think I can recommend for you to use Jalen Cook in your main lineup, especially on the road against Houston. Now, Tulane's been rolling. They beat Wichita 95-90. They smacked SMU. They held on for that 1-point win over Memphis. They held on in extra time against Cincinnati, scored 101 points, and they took care of business against an inferior South Florida team, 84-66. So they're on a nice little 5-game winning streak here since dropping a game at Tulsa that they shouldn't have lost and losing by 20 at home to Houston. So this is a team that's now probably earned themselves at least an NIT bid, and in the conference tournament, things can get really fun because what do you need in March in conference tournaments and 1-game seasons? You need strong guard play, guards who can hit shots, and veterans, and this Tulane team has those things. They're going to have to show me, though, that they can at least hang with Houston. And the Houston defense, while super elite, great coaching staff, great head coach, great overall scheme, there is some fantasy-friendly performances that we've seen come against Houston. And there's no reason to think that Jalen Cook can't do it. And he's been slightly better on the road in terms of scoring, fantasy total, rebounding. It's just he's going to be playing the entire game. So even though he's 9.6, I just feel like there's going to be the opportunity, right? But there is downside here. The upside is taken out. So love him. Got to have some exposure. The appreciation portion of the show is going to continue. Let me run his rates through for you, and then we'll move on to the Houston side. 30.8% shot rate, 30.6% usage rate, 31% assist rate, shooting 32% from long range, so not great, but he's attempted 111, and those are going to continue. Drawing almost 5 fouls per 43.5% steal rate. I love Jalen Cook. He is fantastic. However, he's playing so well that we might not get him next year because the NBA might come calling. Kevin Cross, 25% usage rate, a defensive rebounding rate of 20.2%, an assist rate of 26.3%. That's very Derek Walker-esque of him, which is ironic a little bit since he, used to play for Nebraska very, very briefly. So slightly ironic, don't you think? I like him, but at 9-1, it's a little tougher to get there. And Jalen Forbes, who's playing almost 90% of the minutes, that's top 50, shooting almost 40% from long range. He also is drawing 4.5 fouls per 40, has a 3% steal rate, true shooting percentage that is, pretty solid, top 250-ish in the country. In the conference, it's 6th best in the AAC, so he's got the 10th best in the conference 3-point shooting mark as well. Forbes is a very strong scorer. He was actually in the last slate the odd man out. He was the lesser scorer of the three, but he still put up 31 fantasy points. Now, last time out against Houston, he put up 27. He hit 4 of his 11 threes. So, again, it's not as if they can't perform here against Houston. It's just that some of the top-end upside might be muddled a little bit here in this matchup. But if you were to ask me, hey, I want to ride the wave here, the green wave, and I want to heat check and play one in my main, who can I do? I think Jalen Forbes is the answer, just because you're getting such a steep discount from the other two, and Forbes has multiple times this year outscored both, and he has an opportunity to do so here with all the defensive attention going to Jalen Cook. I think it goes Forbes, Cook, and Cross. Cross the least favorite because going up against that Houston front court, there's just going to be some difficulties there for him. They held him to 12, 4, and 3 last time out, but he did play 36 minutes. So you have to love Tulane because they're going to play their horses for the entire game. Now, on the Houston side, they are getting a matchup against Tulane where Tulane's giving up a bunch of points as well. Their offense is carrying them. Defensively, they haven't been as good, but their offense is carrying them to wins in games that they can keep close, which is a tailor-made team for tournaments and March Madness. Marcus Sasser at 8-4, he's a fine play. It's a premium luxury play. I don't think it's a must. Juwan Roberts at 7K, he's definitely interesting. Jarris Walker at 8-2. He's another one of those luxury plays, not a must. Manny Sharp is 4K after a rough outing last time. I think going back to him makes a ton of sense to get some exposure here. If you don't want to pay up for a Houston guy, but you want exposure, you can get him in. Tremont Mark at 6'2 is at least in play. And then Jamal Sheed sitting there at 7-1. Those are your relevant Houston guys at this moment in time. With Arsenal, who has been missing time, he ended up playing in the Memphis game, which might have negatively impacted Sharp just a little bit. He only played 9 minutes. He's not a fantasy play by any means, but like I said, his mere presence is enough to throw off the ecosystem for Emmanuel Sharp, who just played the 15 minutes against Memphis. One of the things about Sharp is he does have a somewhat higher foul rate. You look at the last 3 games alone, he's had a total of 11 fouls. So at 4K, I definitely still like him. I think minutes-wise, we could see him play, I don't know, somewhere between 18 to 22, even with Arsenal, which would, put him close to value in this particular matchup. Certainly not a slam dunk by any means like he was earlier in the season, though. I have had my fair share of issues with Jamal Shead. I think he's a little bit risky at this price point, playing lots of minutes, but we've seen, a high assist rate as well, but he's had games where he completely disappears on those categories where their shots not falling. Like, he only had 2 dimes against Memphis. He's typically going to get you 5+. We'll see him disappear scoring-wise. There's just a lot of risk there for me with Shed. So I typically don't look his way, even though the 7-1 price point in this matchup is solid. Looking at the box score for the last game, let's pull that up real quick. So Houston, Marcus Sasser had 23 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists. Shed had 14 with 7 assists. Tremont Mark had 12 and 7 with 2 blocks and 2 steals. Mark, who had been kind of an automatic 20 fantasy point scorer, fell off for a little bit. This would be a nice spot to target him at the 6'2". Juwan Roberts had 15 and 6, and Jarris Walker had just the 6 points, but 9 rebounds, a block, a steal, a couple of assists, 4 turnovers. Wasn't as great for him. Manny Sharp just played the 13 minutes, but had 6 points, 1 rebound, and 2 steals. So Houston is a team that can frustrate, but the Tulane games tend to be fantasy bonanzas. I think in tournaments, it's pretty sneaky to probably mini stack it because Tulane stacks in their games have been just so great to us, but this is a horrible matchup, and it makes me sad that we get Tulane on the slate, and I can't even take advantage of it fully. So priority-wise, let's list out Houston because it is a spot where I think people are going to mess up on. So I would start with Tremont Mark just because we're getting a pretty steep discount compared to the rest of the players. He's still, out there playing 25+ minutes, even though he's kind of had his ups and downs. Generally, like I said, he's going to be right around 22 to 25 fantasy points. Now, he had a stretch there in late January where he failed to hit 20 in 3 or 4 straight. But since then, he's put up 25+ in 4 of his last 6, one of which was 22. So not a great game against Memphis. He had foul trouble. I do expect him to have a nice game here. Did have 33 fantasy points against Tulane last time, 5 of 11. Very solid outing. I think at 6'2", he goes overlooked. He's probably my favorite Houston play. Second, I would look to Juwan Roberts, who is $1,200 cheaper than Jarris Walker. Roberts just put up 40 against Memphis. I like him for 4x here. I'm not expecting 40 by any means, but I do think he can hit 30 in this spot as long as there's no silly foul trouble that happens. He had 15 and 6, hit 30.5 fantasy points last time they played Tulane. So I got Mark and then Roberts as my two most viable main team plays. And then when it comes to Sasser and Jarris Walker, I'm mainly looking to them for GPPs because, again, I can get my man Broom there for a few hundred more. And I just don't like the way that Sasser and Walker go into this passive mode at times. There's no consistency with their sometimes they look like just total killers, and other times, like I said, they're deferring, especially Jarris Walker, who will totally just appear to be uninterested in offense totally. Only 6 shots against Memphis, only 6 shots against Tulsa, but then you'll see he put up 15 shots against Wichita State, 12 shots against Temple. So I want to see that version of Jarris Walker, but we're paying a huge tax for somebody that could score 6 to 7 real points. It's a little bit scary for me here, but the matchup is definitely prime. So Tremont Mark, Juwan Roberts, followed by Sasser, Walker, and then Shed there for me. Sharp is not in that group there because he would be just more so probably a GPP value, but he's certainly in my player pool at this moment. All right, so that is the slate. An interesting one. There's some really good matchups here. Let's talk about core PrizePicks, and then we'll head on out. So core play number 1 for me does come from the Clemson Tigers. It is Chase Hunter sitting there at 7-1. I feel like this matchup, if ever there were a time for him to hit a triple-double or flirt with a triple-double, it's this one. Kind of in the mold of a Cameron Hildreth in that regard for his ability to sneakily, put up a decent chunk of rebounds and assists as well as score. He's a very gifted 3-point shooter. I think he could kind of mirror what we saw at Jarkel Joyner against this Syracuse zone a while back, just last week. But he's able to hit threes at a high level. He's a good mid-range jump shooter. He, plop him at the mid-range, and he's going to hit the elbow jumper all game long and rack up a very nice score. His price is up, but 7-1 is still a really strong price. So Chase Hunter, core number 1, and might he be the posh play? I haven't announced a posh play yet, but I definitely think he's very, very close to being one. Core play number 2, and this is a tricky slate too. I definitely want to have an MME. I'm going to go back to my CSV on this one and play some, multiple lineups. But core play number 2, I think is maybe going to surprise some people. Maybe not with the way I've been talking. Shouldn't probably. But Janai Broom, 8-9, core play number 2. As far as the pay-ups go, there are so many, good ones that just in a vacuum you could use. Armando Bacot, Bryce Hopkins, Brandon Miller, Tyree Appleby. I didn't really talk about the Wake Forest side all that in depth, but they're all priced at a level that, I think at NC State's a little tough, like Appleby at 9.3, Hildreth at 7.6, Monsanto at 7.5. They're all just fine plays, but I'm not really on any of the Wake Forest guys this time because I'm respecting NC State that much. So Janai Broom, core play number 2. I feel like we got a good start there with Chase Hunter and Broom. And then the third core play, if Manny Bates is out, I think Jalen Thomas is kind of the no-brainer core play that everybody's going to have. So I don't want to be lame there and say, yeah, Jalen Thomas, but it definitely makes a little sense to fade him, even at the price point of 5.4, which he's come up to. Without Bates, it just seems like he is going to completely own DePaul and put up a very solid score. And then the third, so it's probably is him, right? But I want to give you maybe a core 1A to the 1B. So the other cheapie, or I guess value that I want to look at for the third member of the core, and this one's definitely going to be surprising, I think, for most. It's going to come from the BC Virginia game. And as of right now, I get a little reckless with my cores, but it's Isaac McNeely at 3.8 for Virginia. And here's the reason why. Talked a little bit about him during the Virginia game, but I think the minutes are solid enough at 20 to 25 at the 3.8 price point. He's going up against a Boston College team that is near they're basically dead last in ACC in 3-point defense, but also near the bottom of all of Division I college basketball, 333rd nationally in defense in 3-point defensive percentage. So 3-point shooters can definitely get off against them because they're just not playing defense at a very high level. McNeely is somebody that they've invested a lot of time into when they brought him along. His mechanics were off on his shot. They wanted to get him to improve that, but they've spent a lot of time, the developmental coaches, and this is something that I've read and I've kind of touched about in the past, but that kind of time invested in him is something that tells me he's not just going to be sitting there for 5 minutes and rotting away on the bench. They're going to have him on the floor playing 20, 25 minutes right now, and next year probably playing 30-plus minutes. Now he has at least 4 rebounds in 5 of his last 8 games. So that's very helpful because if it's a bad shooting night, then we need that to supplement. But if he's able to knock down 2 or 3 of those triples, grab 4 rebounds, maybe he adds a steal or gets to the foul line, he's looking at a possible 5X in this matchup against BC. I don't know. I have a kind of a feeling on McNeely here, and this is the time to buy low on him and get ahead of the rest of the field in this matchup. Now, when the article comes out tomorrow, like early afternoon, and I've had time to sleep on it, I do the whole no sleep till May thing or no sleep till Brooklyn, but I do cat nap and power nap throughout the day, but I will, when the show ends here, probably knock out for 3 or 4 hours and kind of try to cool out. That's mainly because I have a headache. But if I change my mind and wake up and have some more clarity and feel like, McNeely's not the guy that I'm thinking or wanting, then I'll certainly let you know in the Discord and in my article and kind of walk it back a little bit. But me, I'm not one to really walk back my plays, comments, anything that I say. I'm pretty much, drawing a line in the sand on most of my guys, and I stick with it. I don't envision myself getting away from Isaac McNeely in my main lineup. I think he puts up a 20-plus fantasy point number against BC. So, core is Isaac McNeely, shocking, I know, Janai Broome, and Chase Hunter. I think you go to war with those 3, and then you make a decision on, do you want another pay up, whether that's Jesse Edwards, whether that's Jalen Cook or Armando Bacot, and then you decide on that second and third value, or if you want to go into that mid-tier, take a guy like a Gigi Jackson, a Jalen Forbes, Jaden Taylor, guys like that are viable, Matthew Morrell, something like that where you can balance out your lineup a little bit more. There are a ton of guys in the 7 and 8K range that I'm happy with and okay to build a mid, balanced lineup, but I'm married to Janai Broome at this point in his matchup. So I do need to find some more value on the slate that I can live with. And we've talked a little bit about it. Florida guys, of course, Butler has a couple there with Jalen Thomas that we can look at. BC has some. LSU has some if we can, bite the bullet there. Houston has Sharp if we want to go that direction. Marcus Hammond for Notre Dame. Alabama values, which Namari Burnett was very close to being a core play over McNeely. He still might, but Burnett's definitely probably going to end up in my main lineup, which frees up a ton of a salary for us. So that's where I stand currently with this slate. It is a tricky one, but we have some leverage opportunities and kind of line in the sand, opportunities to crush. So, and Tulane slates, whether we use them or not, have been extremely good luck for us. All right, PrizePicks wise, let's see what the board is at right now. Give at least 2 here that we can maybe, start with, and then when the board expands in the morning, go from there. First things first, I think a really solid look is Jahmir Young going up against Minnesota. They have his fantasy total here at 31.8. Maybe that seems a little high to you, but Jahmir Young is averaging over 30 fantasy points at this point. He's, the DFS side been priced up over 9K and really hard to play. But for Maryland, he has a usage rate and shot rate over 30%, an assist rate over 24%, a steal rate of 2.6%, drawing 6 fouls per 40, so he gets himself to the line. Looking at his last 5 games against Nebraska, 16 points, 6 rebounds, 6 assists, a block. He did have 4 turnovers. Against Purdue, 20 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 steals. Against Penn State, 18 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, and a steal. Against Michigan State, 17 points, 3 rebounds, 6 assists, 2 steals. And against Minnesota, 14 points, 3 rebounds, and an assist. That one was a blowout. He only had to play 21 minutes because of the massive blowout, which was the main risk there. They're playing Minnesota again, so the risk obviously exists for that one. They are at home as well, but going into the home stretch, last 2 weeks of the regular season, I expect him to play more regardless of the blowout. And if a blowout does happen, it'll be because of Jahmir Young and his ability to contribute in all categories. So over 31.8 fantasy points for Jahmir Young, one of my favorites here at first glance. Kyle Lofton, fantasy points is sitting at 24.5. I don't usually recommend unders that much. Overs are so much more fun, right? But I'm looking at under 24.5 fantasy points for Kyle Lofton here, going up against Kentucky. He's kind of struggled to get to 20 a lot this year, and that 24.5 just seems a little bit high going up against a Kentucky defense that, yes, they haven't been elite, but it's still adequate enough to, keep Lofton from scoring. And he hasn't been the same scorer that we saw at St. Bonnie's. And then I'm looking at the Tulane fantasy points. Jalen Cook's at 30.8 and Jalen Forbes is at 28.5. Now, while I think Cook is probably priced out for DFS, 30.8 fantasy points. He had roughly 32, 33 against Houston last time. You get 3 points, 4 blocks, and steals, but turnovers are -1. He had 11 turnovers versus Memphis. That 30.8 fantasy total is too low, but it's a flex play all the way because of the fact that turnovers could wreck that. So we'll flex Jalen Cook over 30.8 fantasy points if we do it, and we'll flex Jalen Forbes over 28.5 fantasy points if we land there. One more for you, and then I'll talk about any props and we'll get out of here. Jamal Mashburn versus Boise State. At this point, I don't care who New Mexico's playing. I don't care if Jalen House is back, which he was last game. Jamal Mashburn is a freak. He is scoring at such a high level and contributing at such a high level. Give me his over 27.3 fantasy points with confidence. And also you can really look at his real points number 2, which is sitting at 18.5. That might feel high to you, but he's scoring over 20 points with regularity. Having Jalen House there in the mix only helps him anyways, because it's another person that the defense has to account for, and he went ballistic, 30-plus fantasy points with House back in his first game. So all over Mashburn there. That's one of my top plays, over 27 fantasy points, over 18.5 real points is certainly in play too. Looking at DK for some props, just to get your whistle wet there. There is a Jahmir Young over 27.5 PRA at -1. Jeez, it's getting late. -105. I like that quite a bit. They finally priced out Julian Reese. They put his PRA to 19.5. But you're happy to know that Julian Reese finally had a breakout game in that overtime loss to Nebraska. 16 points, 10 rebounds. I was looking at the wrong one. 16 points, 16 rebounds. That's why I wanted to bring it up. A massive double-double for him. He played 31 minutes. He had a usage rate of almost 30%. So happy to see Julian Reese have that game. No reason to think that he can't have another massive double-double here. So the 19.5 PRA is definitely in play. But There is downside because he's not creating his own shot, so I'm a little bit off that one. But I did want to mention I'm very proud of my man Julian Reese. Second PRA number that I'm all over it is minus 120, so we're not getting super good odds. But Chase Hunter, if I like him so much in DFS, 21.5 PRA. I'm clearly taking the over there on Chase Hunter. I'm extremely high on him for this slate. And then Jalen Cook PRA is going to bait us because we don't got to worry about turnovers with the PRA. 24.5 PRA. He's been hitting the over 26 to 27.5 PRA. Give me 30 PRA for Jalen Cook. We've got some room to work. Over 24.5. If I can't play him in DFS, I'm going to find a way to get him in the prop market. All right, so that will wrap it up. A little bit long again today, but that's okay. Lots of information to absorb there. I am on the article, so in the early afternoon, I will have a recap of my player pool listed there in addition to the show if you want to watch on demand. And I'll be back tomorrow night, same time, same place, covering the Thursday slate of games. Thanks a lot, guys, for your continued support. Let's go out there and finish strong. The season is almost over. Bittersweet feeling as always, but still plenty of money-making opportunities. Deuce.